Happy 4th of July and happy birthday to the United States of America. This seemed like the perfect occasion to compile our top 10 VINwiki car stories about American cars. So I hope that you'll enjoy that today, and I hope that your day's plans involve some relaxation, some celebration with family, and maybe even a road trip to see that family. But if your road trip happens to involve a speeding ticket, then we'd love for you to look up the Ticket Clinic. You can find them at the link in the description below, but if you get a ticket, no matter where it happens, you can actually just text a picture of it to 305-305 and they'll get on the case. Whenever you get a speeding ticket, you're going to be facing costly fines, insurance premium increases, points on your license, risks of suspension, even jail time. And again, the Ticket Clinic is the perfect partner in that fight. They're a nationwide law firm with brick and mortar offices in some states like Florida, Georgia, and California, but they've got a network of attorneys throughout the country to help you fight a ticket with great local representation no matter where you get it. So be sure to check them out now at the link in the description below to thank them for their continued support of VINwiki and of Car Trek. But here they are, our top 10 American car stories.
It's a bulging supercar in a small town. There was a friend of mine who left our small town and went all the way to California, became a videographer for Discovery and whatnot, and he would be the crazy guy shooting like World's Deadliest Catch. And anyway, he goes, "Casey, man, we got to do a sizzle about you or something, like, who knows, you're crazy enough, we got to do a show." I'm like, all right, let's take the race car. And at the time I had a chassis built by Bob McKee for the early USRR series, which was the predecessor to Can-Am. And in about 1970-71, it was bodied with a Lola T70 Mark IIIB body. So basically, you know, a European endurance race or something you'd see in the movie Le Mans, that sort of thing. It was basically my entire net worth in my late 20s, right? So I told him, let's take it, I'll find a track day. We would go to Nelson Ledges, this tiny little track up in Akron, Ohio, and just to do some video. And of course, I'm the only goofball showing up in a Can-Am car, basically. Period correct looking clothing, open face helmet, goggles and everything. And I see this blue with white stripes 97 Viper GTS sitting there with a wing on. I'm like, I gotta check this out. It was just cool. I mean, anything built by Bob Lutz, testosterone machine, is probably something I'm gonna wanna drive. And I said to the man who had it, was going to the track day, I said, "Sir, I'm interested in buying one of these cars. Do you mind if I just look inside your car?" And he goes, "Sure, actually, hell, you got a fast car. You can drive it if you want." I'm like, "Really, on the track?" "Okay, next session?" "Yeah, all right." And my dad was with me, and as many dads are, he's like, "Are you crazy?" I'm like, "Dad, I'm here in a cool car. I can afford to buy it. Why not? You know, let's test drive it." And I had no idea how to work the head unit, the radio. It was one of those that flip up, and the reason that matters is we're pulling out of the pits to go on the track in this car I've never been in that's fast with my dad, who's being a dad. It was blasting like speed metal, like the whole time. It was like Power Man 5000 or something like this, like full stereo. Your hair's tingling, it's so loud. My dad's like, "Turn that crap off." And I'm like, "I know, man." And I pushed buttons and the head unit just folds up. And I'm like, I don't know how to use this, Dad. We got to just go. He's like, "But this is crap." And I'm like, "Just go with it, man." And I just fell in love immediately. That big blue bulging hood and those beautiful mirrors. And it made my dad bothered, so it was probably pretty cool. And I talked to the man, he goes, "Actually, I was thinking about maybe selling it." So later I called him on the phone, we arranged the deal. It was a very nice price. I'm like, I gotta get there and buy this quick before he changes his mind. And I lived in a small town, and this man lived about 2.5 hours away, and I had to find a buddy who could drive the car home. Nobody was available. And so I called this girl who was interested. I'm like, "You wanna go with me out of town to buy a car? I need somebody to drive it back. We'll have a fun, make a day thing out of it." And as oftentimes you're surprised by people who own supercars, it's very interesting to see where they live. And she's like, "Oh, it's just down here, the driveway." And we're on this driveway, and on this driveway, and on this driveway, and it goes and goes and goes past horses and manicures, very beautiful. And you get to a very beautiful house with a turnaround, American flag out, and I remember as a sunset, and there's the Viper just sitting there looking glorious. But the thing that was so interesting about this Viper is, as a 20-something single guy, I realized this car over a lot of other exotic cars seems to have an effect on this single woman. I really like this and I'm gonna go with this. And soon after, the car earned the nickname Goose because I said it was the best wingman ever and it had absolutely nothing to do with flying. And at the time I lived in a very small Midwestern town, 18,000 people. There's some industrial, a lot of farming, that sort of thing. And our family business was a small golf course out of town. And every day I'd drive to the golf course. And the course being out in the middle of the country, you know, there's not a lot of patrolmen out there, and being a race driver, I would use my car and really enjoy it. I would drive out to the golf course every day, have a great time. There's a hot rod shop out there. I knew I could blaze by there in like fourth gear, and then there used to be a railroad track, so I slow down. You just crest the hill without catching air. And there's a stop sign, this beautiful road between fields. There's nobody around, and you could accelerate full throttle, like first, second, third gear, right into fourth, and you'd be flat out, and you could just get to that corner without lifting. And of course, you're on and sailing by. And then eventually a little bit you start seeing a few residential houses, so you bring it back down to a reasonable speed. And then there was this left-hand turn, which is kind of a third gear sweeper. So, you know, boom, boom, third gear, flat out, back down this hill, back up to fourth, fifth, down to first, and then blast it back up to the golf course. You know, I grew up driving like that, and that's probably how it helped become a race car driver. But there's a problem with this that I didn't realize as a 20-something-year-old kid. It's not going to take long before everybody knows who you are and everybody knows your driving habits. And it didn't help matters that on that third gear corner, there was a very crusty old man that lived there. And that on the other street, where I would slow down just a little bit for the crest of the hill, my ex-girlfriend mother, who hated my guts, I don't know why, because I was very nice to her, what happened was the hot rod guys started seeing sheriffs sitting on the road. And they're like, you guys never patrol out here. Is there something we should know about? Well, probably my ex-girlfriend's mother made such a fuss about it that it became a thing in a small town where it basically was the Dukes of Hazzard, and it became a Roscoe P. Coltrane's got a bet with the city cops to who can nail the flashy race car Viper first. And it hit me within about 3 hours, yeah, I'm done. I'm done with this town. I can't be me here anymore. I'm not going to be able to work on race cars and flashy cars if this is the way it is. Because this isn't like the 70s and 80s. I can't go sliding a Dodge Charger sideways and have fun with the good old boys. I made a deal to move out of town to work with this guy with his race shop and do some fun stuff. And a week later, it was a very short time, I ended up moving out of town and starting things that way. When I moved out of town to Columbus, Ohio, it had a really good exotic car scene. The Cars and Coffee there. I loved the environment. I loved being around the people. The horizon was much bigger and better. But at the same time too, I was young and cocky, and which probably didn't work in my favor, but made things a lot of fun sometimes. We would go on all these great exotic car drives through the countryside and power into numbers, you know, you're fast, and it was fun. And I remember this time we got lost in the middle of the country, totally turned around. Now there's all these supercars, it looked like Austin Powers trying to turn around, and they're going up this gravel hill. And another friend of mine, Joe, in a Porsche comes there to turn around. And I kind of had this little thing, which was very immature of me at the time. I was in my 20s, give me a break. With this guy he was pretty cool. He was a CEO. He really got into Ferraris, Lamborghinis. But to me and my kind of friends that built stuff, he was sort of like the rich kid of the group in high school that's not really that cool and not that good at riding BMX bikes, but he hangs out anybody, but you kind of want to mess with him, you know? And I remember he was behind me in some Ferrari, and I'm like, all right, let's see if you can do this. So I'm like, okay, flip into kart racing mode. And I hadn't done this in the Viper, but my brain just told me I could. We need to turn around and go this way, and I've got a short area. So I'm like, I'm just gonna light them up, light up the tires, get the coefficient, twitch it this way, that way, and spin it around and go back, no problem. Well, it actually worked, and it was a beautiful thing. It did it exactly how it worked in my mind, which that's not always how life works, but in this case it did, and I was thankful. And I remember accelerating by him in the Ferrari, and just for a moment I was like, wah, like this. And that was me in my 20s. But the Viper was a fantastic car. It was reliable. I just enjoyed putting miles and miles and miles on it because it never broke. And I never felt bad about parking in a parking lot because it had a fiberglass body and you wouldn't get door dings. And I remember in 2013, it was December, there was no snow on the ground, there was no ice, and I took the Viper out to go meet with some friends. And I was driving back to my condo on Sawmill Drive, and it was a typical, 2 lanes each way and a median, 45, 50 mile an hour. And I was just driving home, wasn't even doing anything interesting or going fast, and I see a car come blazing out from the other side across traffic, and I'm thinking, okay, they probably see me coming and they just want to go southbound like me. I'm just going to move over a lane, let them have that lane. No. And this is all happening within quarters of a second. And so I just move over in the lane, maintain the speed, and I see the car count. I'm like, they're not stopping. I was mad because now I'm on the brakes as hard as I can. It is a Viper with ABS. It's December. Pirellis are not going to grab. And then the moment goes, I'm going to hit that car. And there's nothing I can do. And I'm like, I'm mad. And then I see that big, beautiful Viper hood I fell in love with on the racetrack go, whoa, like this. And it hit hard enough that it felt weightless, but I didn't know if I was just like instantaneous adrenaline mad. And just pommeled the car, and then slid and then hit the curb. And I'm sitting there, I'm fine. The airbags never went off because I put in a Nardi wheelie, so those were gone. And I had the presence of mind from working on cars for all those years. Okay, the car got wrecked in the front. Turn off the motor so nothing bad happens to the engine so you can fix it in the future. And I like turn off the car and I'm so mad. And I like get out, and this is a very busy street, 5 lanes, but I didn't care. I'm black leather jacket, sunglasses on, I just straight Terminator marched across the road because I hit this car so hard, it stopped all the forward momentum. It spun around like once or twice in oncoming traffic where other cars hit it. You know, this is my car. I worked to get this. I'm a kid from like the cornfields working on this, and you just wrecked it. Like, and it's a Viper, so everybody's gonna think I screwed up. You know what I mean? Come on. So I remember walking up and this door opens, and for a moment, I didn't feel bad, but like, I'm not gonna pick a fight because it was this not very athletic looking young woman in a not very athletic looking car. But I was so mad, it just took over, and all that came out of my mouth was stupid. And so I turned around, and I, you know, come on, I'm a little embarrassed, but like the car just got wrecked. Give me a break. Everybody was fine. Nobody got hurt at all. But the car she ended up clipping over there was driven by a young woman who's probably 16 years old that had her baby in the back seat and another woman over there. And I'm like, oh my God, could this be any more ridiculous? And everybody's going to think I'm basically Satan, because clearly it's my fault, even though I was doing the speed limit and obeying all the laws and I have 0 points on my license. And I'm standing over there, and now the guy who lives a few doors down from me sees this. He's driving his Nissan GTR, so he's going to come to Car Guy Rescue. And now suddenly other like exotic cars are coming by to see what's going on. And these people involved with the wreck, and they all think I'm the devil because basically it's an exotic car and now there's a wreck. So a police officer does everything, comes up to me and says, sir, she was in a left-hand turn lane only. Everything she did was illegal. Even if you were doing 200 miles an hour, it's still her fault. You're fine. And I said, well, thank you, but I actually wasn't this time. The car was pretty smashed up. I mean, it's a Viper, there's other fish in the sea, let insurance take it. I did well enough, had a good policy, and they went to bat for me on the other people, so everything was fine. And I got a call from a guy that had bought my wrecked Viper, and he was fixing it up because I had a sticker on it. He tracked me down. And he goes, I wondered if you maybe had any parts for it. And I'm like, actually, I do. And so he bought some parts off of me, and he fixed it up, and I didn't pay attention to it. And he calls me back 6 months later and go, well, I fixed it, but I think I'm going to sell it. You want to buy it? And the price was right. And I went and looked at it, and I had a tick, had some things to do, but my fiance at the time, my wife, was like, that car was your baby. Like, that was you. You need to just get it. And I did. And I spent a bunch of time fixing it up. And me rebuilding the car was therapeutic because I never want to get rid of it. I'm going to put 1 million miles on this thing. It's still a great car. It's still a total hooligan car, but it's very reliable. They say you can't keep a good man down, and you can't keep a good car down. And so for me, my favorite car forever, daily driver, is my 97 Dodge Viper GTS.
But it was a let's go down there with cash right now type of deal. I get a lot of interesting emails, and of course everybody's a Craigslist expert, so they're always sending me interesting listings, typically too good to be true deals, and saying that, oh, this is amazing, you should go buy this. And I'm like, it's a scam, you know, all that. I have one customer in particular who sends me many per week. Every now and then I get a hit off of them. So he sent me this anniversary Corvette on Craigslist that was local to us. I looked it up. The listing was actually a few months old. When I went on Craigslist and searched for it, because all of a sudden it disappeared, there was an identical posting that morning, an hour before he sent me the old one. So I'm like, that's kind of weird. So I called the lady. Sure enough, she picked up the phone. Yes, the car's actually real. I have the car, I want to sell it. But that's where the complications started. And she starts talking and telling me this whole backstory of why the car is for sale. Her brother had died a couple years ago, and she had just come to grips with being able to sell the car, and that just got more complicated from there. And the price was indeed, I won't say too good to be true, but it was a let's go down there with cash right now type of deal. So of course the alarm bells always go up when that's the case. But not only that, she just starts telling me all this backstory that I don't need to know. Oh, by the way, the title's in my sister's name. Is that okay? I'm like, I really don't care. As long as she's there to sign it off and has proper identification, then that's fine. Oh, by the way, can you give me cash? Because, you know, we've had some tax issues with our business and this and that. I'm like, just stop talking. I'm like, yes, I can pay you cash. I'm buying a car from you. It's a legitimate transaction, but don't, just stop this. I couldn't get there right away because I had to pick a customer up from the airport. So I'm just asking her, hey, please don't sell the car to somebody else. I will come down this afternoon with cash, but I can't leave now. I can't strand this guy at the airport who came in to buy a slant-nose turbo Porsche. She goes, well, there's this other dealer that's calling and they're offering me $1,000 less, but you know, I don't necessarily want to take that, but they're bothering me. And I said, no, I'll give you the full amount. Just hang on for me. And I'd finally get her off the phone, and then half an hour later, she'd call me again. And just every conversation, the deal got weirder and weirder. I heard a story actually in Ohio, somebody posting a job on Craigslist on their farm. And when people would go out to interview for the job, he had a rifle and he was sniping people, taking them out as they showed up. Buying cars off Craigslist or buying things off Craigslist can be hazardous to your health. I went back to the shop, got my trailer, went home, got my gun, and I called a friend of mine. So I said, hey, how far are you from Kent? He goes, oh, I'm 5 minutes. I'm like, great, stay there. I need you to follow me because I'm gonna go up to this address, and if anything's off, I need somebody else to be there. So I pull down the address and look in, the garage is open. Sure enough, there's a 2003 anniversary Corvette convertible in there. And I'm like, well, the car's real. Totally legit. The car's there. Her sister shows up with the title. I had called the title bureau, ran the title number, confirmed everything was on the up and all that. But the adventure had just gotten started. We go to the local PNC bank, which was not my usual branch. Not necessarily the best municipality in Ohio. So we go to the bank, and I go in and I go up to the counter and I said, hi, I'd like $31,000 in cash. And the lady there was a little bit off put, but okay, let's see what we can do. So I had done a wire transfer in earlier that day for this purchase. Well, the bank who had sent the wire transfer was taking their sweet time, hadn't put it in, so the money wasn't there yet. So that held them up for a while. And after making phone calls, it still wasn't there. I said, forget this, I'm just gonna do a direct transfer from my personal account, which I just did on my phone. So I went back up to the counter. I said, hey, I just did the transfer, the money's there. So they go to the back office, hushed conversations, guys on the phone, and I'm, sitting in the lobby with this lady. So it's, a little bit uncomfortable. And after, I don't know, 20 minutes or so, they come out and, oh, we're on the phone with our loss prevention something or other specialist. And I said, why? It's my money. Oh, I know, but we just have to make sure we're protecting everybody. And I'm like, but it's my money. Just give me my money. I know you're a bank and you have to protect your interests, but let me take this risk. I'm pretty sure I know what I'm doing. After a while, they just said, hey, we can't give you the cash for whatever reason. And I said, okay, well, how about a cashier's check? That's perfectly fine. It's the same. The lady was agreeable to that. Well, we can't issue a cashier's check unless we have enough cash in the branch to back it. I'm like, that's a new one. I haven't heard this one before, but the lady finally comes out and she goes, Mr. Tabbitt, I think your Twinsburg branch can better assist you. And I'm like, are you telling me no, or what is it? I think your Twinsburg branch can better assist you. I'm like, okay, I'm getting kicked out of this bank. Awesome. on the way out, they hand me this flyer that is all about like money laundering and drug trafficking and how to know if you're involved in all this. And I'm like, are you serious? Are you serious right now? And like, she had even brought in the title to the vehicle and all that. So it was like, you know, there shouldn't be any suspicion, but because it was Ravenna, Ohio, this was not a normal thing for them. Of course, I'm super embarrassed because I'm trying to buy this car and, you know, not able to get my money to do it. So I apologized. I said, hey, you know, I'll be back in an hour. I'm gonna run up to my usual PNC branch and get this thing taken care of. And of course, you know, they close at 4, so we're on the clock now. And I've got my trailer in tow still, so I call Twinsburg and say, hey, I'm on my way, I need cash. So I boogie up there, and they have it all ready and counted out, you know. And so I walk in and they go, so how would you like it? You want a briefcase? Or, you know, like it became this big joke there. So they counted out the cash, and thankfully I still had my piece on me, so I wasn't too worried about carrying around a whole bunch of cash. I went back, I loaded the Corvette onto my trailer and got it back to my warehouse. And you know, it's funny because I unload it, I put it in my warehouse, and I just stand there and look at it. And this ordeal started at like 9 that morning when I had gotten the email. And it was probably 6 o'clock by the time I got it in my warehouse. And I'm just standing there and I'm like, I never actually thought this car existed, let alone that I got it back. And I'm just kind of reveling in the fact that I'm like, the car is real and it's in my warehouse. Every now and then a deal that's too good to be true isn't. But the only problem with that is the hope of that is what keeps people getting scammed over and over again, because everybody's looking for that deal. The problem is they're not always as easy as they seem. I think I sold it for 36, and I actually sold it to a retired local police chief, as cherry gets. Kind of the neatest part of the deal for me is she had a set of really nice HRE wheels on it, but she had the magnesium wheels in the basement. And of course, on a 1,200 mile anniversary Corvette, HRE wheels don't add any value. They actually detract it. I put the magnesium wheels on the car, kept the HRE wheels, and now I have a spare set of HREs for my Vet.
Pills come out from everywhere. You know, when I got out of high school, I was looking for a job, a steady job. I had to get some benefits and be, you know, an adult, go to work. Well, you know, I worked in a parts store and had pretty good luck with that. So I said, hey, why not apply for a parts position somewhere? Well, our local Nissan dealership, they called me back, and I'll never forget it. The store manager calls me up and he says, I got good news and bad news. He said, good news is you're hired. I said, great. What's the bad news? He said, you're also fired. We got bought out today. But he said, I'm pretty sure that you will have a job with our new owner. They just bought their Nissan franchise. They didn't use their building, the property, or anything. He said, basically gave me an address, which was a Hilton Hotel in downtown. He said, meet these guys at this time. Well, I walk into the Hilton, and there's some guys there in bright blue golf shirts and their perfectly starched khaki pants, working for a major automotive retailer, CarMax, the auto superstore. And they told me all about CarMax Way. CarMax hadn't made its way into South Carolina yet. It was news to me. He said, Rob, we need you to go to room 312. I'm like, okay. I mean, it's just so weird. I mean, I'm a 19-year-old kid. I'm real green at this stuff. I mean, I'm just like, okay, you know, kind of feeling it out. I mean, I'm about to get molested or something. This is crazy, you know? And the weirdest thing about this hotel room is all the furniture was gone out of it. And they gave me a drug test on the spot, which that was never a problem. So I took my drug test and I asked him, I said, it's none of my business, but why is there no furniture in this hotel room? And he said, well, we didn't want it to be intimidating when you walked in. And I'm like, you know, I understand if you're, you know, interviewing a little girl or something, you know, or a young woman or something like that, but okay, you know, whatever. So they flew me to Dulles, Maryland to show me the CarMax Way. And they asked me a lot of questions about my background, and I told them, you know, in sales, and told them, you know, clean up, and I said, I'm pretty good with numbers, pretty good with parts, pretty good mechanical knowledge, really good with body work. Told them a few little stories about that, they laughed. And I said, you know what, I might even be good at sales. You never know. And they said, we really don't think you'd be good for sales at CarMax. And which everybody knows after dealing with them, I see why they say that, because CarMax don't have salespeople, they have test drive monitors. But they stuck me in the parts department in Dulles, Maryland. I'd never been out of town before. First time I was on an airplane in my life. We get there and they gave me a car to drive. And I mean, Dulles, Maryland, I don't know if you've ever been there or not, but it's cold, and I'll just say that, it's cold and rough, very rough. Huge dealership, 1,000 used cars on the lot, 6 new car franchises in that one spot. And then I came back to Greenville, and the store was almost done. We were fixing to have our grand opening. We opened February 14th on Valentine's Day was our opening day. I'll never forget, they gave me a car to drive, and they said, we need you to go to the airport. We had Sterling Marlin there for our grand opening. I hope there's no NASCAR fans on here. So I picked this prick up, and the first thing he says, get out of the car, I drive everywhere. I'm like, whatever, I like drag racing better anyway, I care less. So we drive back and we do our grand opening thing. And they bought some nice cars, some really late model cars, which CarMax, that's their big thing. Low miles, late model, that's what they look for. And they usually miss everything else in between. They brought in a red Dodge Dakota truck. And the buyers were talking about it. He said, the Dodge dealership here doesn't even have one on the front line. And we have one on our opening day on our used car lot. And I said, yeah, it's a good looking truck. But I said, you can tell the bed's been painted on it. They said, no, Rob, that truck only has 6,000 miles on it. He said, it could have been a repossession or something like that, but he said, that truck's never had paint work done on it. And I said, whatever, I'm not gonna argue with you about it. And I mean, I spotted that from 30 feet away. They sold the truck the very first day. Next day, I come back into work. I seen that little red Dakota coming right back in again one day. I mean, the next day is coming back. I'm like, that's crazy. Pull in the service department. Technician throws RO on the counter and starts laughing. Says, look under bed liner. They pull the bed liner back on it. It's got a blue bed inside. These cars are not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I said, you got a front fender with orange peel, you got a door with orange peel, and you got a bedside that's slick as glass that's been cut and buffed. I said, it's a dead giveaway that something's been done downside of this truck. And I said, I'm not saying it was a bad fix. I mean, somebody put a bed on it. It's probably a great truck, but it has been painted on. He said, you reckon you could help our buyers out a little bit? We got a project. He said, they need a little training. He said, they meet the criteria as far as the cars they're finding, but they may need a little help looking for potential body damage and things of that nature. They came in with a Firehawk Trans Am. Black, good looking Trans Am. He said, now that's a good looking car. He said, this car will do great in this market. And they were just bragging it up. I said, it's a good looking car, but I said, you can tell the entire driver's side's been painted on this car. And he said, Rob, there's no orange peel on it. I said, but look down the other side and across the hood. Catch it in the right light. You see those little dimples? That's orange peel. He said, nope, you got it wrong. I'm not gonna argue with this man. I'm fine. I went back going to the parts counter, hanging out. They put it up on the lift, changed oil in it, did a little CQI inspections on it. Pulled up on the lift, masking tape across the bottom of it, black paint across the bottom of the rocker panel on it. Another car goes to wholesale because we didn't sell wrecked cars. And they stood behind that. They wouldn't sell them. They would wholesale them off. We had a competitor, and I'm not going to call it out, but I was sent on a mission to go on their car lot and find all the wrecked cars or painted cars. And their buyer had already been over there one time earlier in the week, and he said he found only one car on the lot that he thought had it. He already told me where it was at, what it looked like, even the stock number of this car, so I could go right to it. And that car did have a little paintwork on it. He lucked up and hit one that did. I found about 12 that did, including one with clamp marks from a frame machine, and they really liked that. So I told them the price. We looked the car up online. They gave me cash, and I went and bought this car and brought it back. And we found a card for a body shop in it. We've got pictures of this car in the body shop on a frame machine that this guy took. And now they're selling this car that's never been wrecked or in trouble and with a clean Carfax report. The thing you gotta understand about a Carfax report too, unless insurance pays off on it, it doesn't get listed. If that car's paid for, it will never be known. And we put it in the showroom. at CarMax with all their tags and their stickers and their window stickers still in it, and with little notes. I actually wrote the notes that were printed out and little signs by the car. Potential frame damage, clamp marks, and pictures of this car in the body shop. CarMax was the weirdest company ever. They took auto restoration to the next level. They would take off a set of Michelins that were knee deep, 10,000 miles, to put a set of no-name new tires on. Well, what do we do with all these used tires? And they come to me about it. I stocked every used tire shop in West Greenville. To this day, if I need a tire, I don't pay for anything in West Greenville. I'm the king of used tires in West Greenville. I stock these tire shops up. Keep in mind, we're selling 500-600 units a month out of this store. They just want somebody to take them. And I'm like, I'm calling these used tire stores up. I said, you want to get some tires? How much are they? I said, they're free. They're free. And they see these tires, and I mean, like, maybe 1 in 10 would not be usable. So they love this. Aftermarket accessories, anything with a speaker box, anything in the trunk, a trailer hitch. They took them off, and they were throwing them in the dumpsters. We had the garbage man climbing in the dumpster, digging out trailer hitches. He had a side hustle online. But we bought some Explorers that were conversions. They had a high top on them like a van. They were crazy looking, had every tacky stick-on accessory on them, just cheesy running boards, the whole shooting match. We sold it, and it came back a few days later. It's a waiter, there's a noise in the dash. Technician comes in, first thing he does, drop the glove box down, because he could hear it when he turned the heat on, the blower motor on. He drops the glove box down, a little baggie of pills falls out. Hits the dash, more pills fall out. He pulls the glove box inside out, pulls back the heater box, pills come out from everywhere. Little baggies with about 2 to 3 pills in each one, different colors. We pulled the door panels off of it, full of pills. We pulled the back quarter panels off of it, interior quarter panels, full of pills. This person is sitting in the service waiting room, and we're pulling shovel loads of pills out of this damn Explorer. I call the police. So a Greenville County SWAT car drives by, they see it pull in, drive in and around. We filled up a 30-gallon trash bag with mystery pills, and I'm pretty sure it's not Tylenol, cold and flu, but I'm pretty sure somebody lost their damn life because of this car getting lost. We had a drug dog go through it, put all the panels back on it, cleaned it up in the detail shop while they waited, and they pulled it around. They said, guess what, your blower motor, the fan, was a little loose. Got you all ready to go. And they never knew it. And the cops were still there when they left. That's what makes it so much fun. And it was just another day at the Max.
Maybe God hates Mustangs, I don't know, but it's not my fault. I rode motorcycles with a bunch of guys, and they were going to do a cross-country trip where we were all going to put all of our bikes in containers, ship them out to California through various ways, fly out, whatever, and then ride them all back. Well, due to some work commitments, a few other things, I couldn't fly out. I couldn't make the road trip out, so I ended up having to just sort of drive out and catch up. I contacted Budget Rental Car, and I picked a car up at Hartsfield, which was a little Toyota Corolla, just tan interior. The tires were probably tan. It was just tan all over. It was the most invisible, nondescript little car. And I'm not a huge guy. I'm 6'1", but it was a little cramped and a little tight. But, you know, this was going to be my chariot. You know, the license plate on my truck says all-nighter. I've prided myself at staying up for days on end. When I paint a mural, sometimes I'll stay awake for 3-4 straight days, just painting day and night. I can just do that. And that's just one of my superpowers. So I head out and, you know, drive across country, and it's fantastic. You know, it's just, I'm seeing parts of the country I've never seen before. Across the Mississippi for the first time. I'm, you know, seeing the landscape change, and, you know, it's great to drive at night and to watch the sun come up as you're driving. I've driven across this country in about 43 hours, which is not a great time, but I was not trying to set any records. I was in a Toyota Corolla, just trying not to get a ticket and trying to catch up with my motorcycle. So I get to San Francisco early morning, meet up with the guys that have got my bike, and one of them follows me to the rental car place to return the car. And this is 20 years ago, but at the time, they didn't have the key drops, all that kind of stuff. We go and talk to the guy, here's your car, and he kind of looks at the paperwork for a minute, and he types on the computer and looks on the paperwork and, types on the computer some more. Says, hold on for a second. And he goes in the back, he gets the guy, another guy comes out, he looks at the paperwork, types in the computer, calls somebody on the phone, kind of looks at me, looks at the car, puts the phone down, said, where'd you get this car from? I said, Hartsfield Airport in Atlanta. Goes outside, he starts checking the VIN number, and he's checking the door, and and he said, when did you rent this car? And so the night before last. And so he types in the computer some more, and he's a little perturbed, and I'm like, is there a problem? He said, well, that's an 8-day rental. And I said, well, I know, but I just drove it straight through, and the problem turned out that, back then, if you picked a car up like after 4, they didn't charge you for that day. And if you got it back before 11, they didn't charge you for that day. So I really only had the 1-day rental from Atlanta to San Francisco. And the computer was not having it. The computer was like, that's an 8-day trip, doesn't compute it. Now the guy starts thinking that maybe I'm trying to launder a stolen car or something. So he's comparing the VIN and he's reading the car and he just does not want to take this car back for some reason. I don't know what he thought I was trying to do. There was just something that didn't compute with this guy and he was not having it. But, they dug around and there was nothing wrong with renting a car and returning it and, 43 hours later. But the fact that it was well over its first oil change and had, this copious amounts of miles on it for 43 hours, he was not happy. But it, it is what it is. So he took the car back and we continue on the trip. The trip was exciting, but a few days into the trip, my motorcycle just had a catastrophic failure and was not going to make the trip. And I had limped it from where we were out in California through Death Valley on the 4th of July, actually, which don't ever do that. It's like driving in a hairdryer. Made it to Vegas, tried to get the bike fixed there, but it was just not going to happen. So the guys on the trip, I'm like, going without me, I'll sort it out. My wife at the time was with me. So I decided, okay, look, we're in the Southwest. We're here to see something. The bike trip didn't work out, but let's don't go out like that. So I called Budget Rental Car up again. And I said, hey, what do you got that's cool? And they said, well, we got a convertible Mustang. It literally just came in today. It's got 4 miles on it. I'm like, that sounds fantastic. We take off, and we only had about 3 days. I had to get back to Georgia with the bike to get back to work. So I got 3 days to kill in the Southwest in this rental car. And again, kind of being my first road trip ever, I didn't want to miss anything. So, since I've kind of learned to more go a little slowly and process things. But at the time, I just wanted to shopping spree style, just frantically run through every national park and monument I could possibly see, So we just take off, and this is Grand Canyon and Four Corners and Castle Rock and Moab and the Arches and just blowing through the Southwest. And I always really wanted to go to Colorado too. So, hey, we could cut up through Moab and go to Colorado. That sounds great. And so we get to Moab, and I'd been an off-roader and always been excited to see this place. But, of course, I'm now in the least appropriate vehicle, but I wanted to see something. So we're in this Mustang convertible, and I see this little dirt road off to the side. It looks like it kind of went out towards some pretty rocks and stuff. So, hey, let's go try that. It's a dirt road. This car can do it. So I drive on the dirt road, and it starts getting a little steeper, but the car's doing fine. And, driving and a little steeper, a little rockier. And, my wife at times getting a little nervous. I'm like, we're fine. We're fine. I'm just excited. I just want to see what's around the next curve. So I kept going, and now we started going downhill again. And, it kept getting steeper and steeper, a little bit of gravel on hard rocks and a little steeper and steeper. And, I'm not sliding or anything, but it just starts to turn into more of a Jeep trail. And I'm like, okay, it's probably time to turn around. And, and if you've been to Moab or somewhere in the Southwest like that, it's like the old Roadrunner cartoons. It's just like a cliff with a little shelf on it and another cliff. And kind of nothing dangerous, but kind of a narrow road, no guardrail or anything like that. And I go to, stop the car, and I'm just going to back out the way I came. That seemed like a good idea. So I put it in reverse, and of course the tires kind of spin, and the rear kind of walks over towards the cliff a little bit. So I stop, and okay, I move forward about 10 feet, try it again, a little more over. And each time I try to back up, the car just wants to kind of spin in the gravel, and as it spins, it just wants to walk over towards the edge. And of course, that's the side my wife's on, and she's not happy. So let's just keep going. This trail just gets steeper and steeper. I don't really have an option to go back out, and it's like a Monday or something. So it's not like, it's a weekend with a bunch of guys in Jeeps and trucks can maybe pull me out or something. So we basically just kept going. Eventually, the road just starts getting steeper and steeper, and I go to stop and kind of plan on it, and the car just starts to kind of shimmy a little bit. I'm thinking, oh, this isn't good. There's this huge drop over here and a huge wall over here. So we just kind of slide down, and there's this little ledge in the rock, and the car just kind of, it wasn't huge or anything, but the car just kind of skates off the ledge. It just makes this god-awful scraping noise just up underneath the car and gets on the bottom of it. And the road thankfully kind of leveled out and crossed a little creek and turned out to get onto a regular road, and we were able to go back out that way. But I get to the stop sign, I could hear a scraping kind of sound under the car. Not good. So I get out, and immediately I noticed that the big ground effects piece between the front wheel and the back wheel on my side is just gone. And the one on her side was mostly gone. That's what was dragging. And the tailpipe in the rear, which is just a little V6, but the tailpipe was a little squished, and the valance was not quite attached in the back anymore. And I'm not one to tear up anybody's things. I don't trash rental cars on purpose, but I did immediately pat myself on the back for checking that little $12 damage waiver. I'm like, well, they're not going to like this, but you know, it wasn't intentional, and I'm really sorry, and I'm sure I'll make it work. She was a very rule follower type person. Now she's not happy, you're going to be in trouble. And I was like, no, I checked the box. It's okay. And you're getting in trouble. But now we got to get the car back to Vegas and get a van or a truck or something. So I've called ahead, and I'd reserved a truck to put my motorcycle in so we can drive the truck with the bike, fallen soldier style, back to Georgia. So I'm having a great time. She's actually sleeping. I'm just, you know, sailing. And again, you know, this is not a great driver's car, but I'm having a fantastic time. The top's down, sun's out, just blasting. And on the horizon, though, I see what looks like a mountain range. And I was like, cool, you know, I've already seen the Rockies. It's really exciting. But the mountains just didn't look right. And it was just this wall with kind of looked like snow, but dirty snow on the top. And as I'm getting closer, I realized that it's a lot closer than I think. It looked like it was, you know, 100 miles out on the horizon, but it was actually very close. And it was not a mountain range. It was a sandstorm. And it's like those ones that you've seen these pictures, the guys that, you know, served over in the Middle East with these big walls of sand coming at you. I'm like, oh my God. So I pull over, put the top up, kind of wake her up, like, hey, check that out. And so it doesn't look good. So, you know, we're thinking, I mean, there's literally nothing for 100 miles in any direction. Like, where do we go? She tells me, let's try to beat it. So I'm like, wow, I got to like actually get a permission from my wife to go fast. So I'm pegging this thing out, but it's coming closer and coming closer. And eventually it's just on us. And again, it's, you know, big winds, nothing like a tornado or anything, but you can just hear the sand just pelting this car. Just, I mean, just this awful, sounded like a snake hissing and a sandblaster. It was this pretty kind of a candy orange color, you know, like a silver base with a candy orange over it. It's a beautiful color car. And oh my God, it was just getting pelted. And so, you know, driving through it, and there's lightning from all the static and just tops kind of whipping around. And again, the winds aren't that bad, but anyway, so we finally get to this little gas station and, you know, pull in under their gas cover, but there's nothing to, again, the sand's just coming sideways. This car just gets hammered, and, you know, finally the winds die down, and, you know, get out to go inside, and the power's been knocked out. And I noticed that the building actually had like an exit on all four sides. And talking to the lady inside, they actually do that on purpose because these sandstorms are sort of common, and they want you to be able to get into the store not on the side that the wind was blowing. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But anyway, so we get inside and, you know, get a drink, get a few snacks, and go back out to the car. And it looked like your favorite Hot Wheels car from childhood, where you had played with it so much that all of the paint was just missing from the leading edges of the fenders and the wheel arches and the hood. And the whole thing was now just this, could be pretty cool now, but it was just this like satin kind of matte metallic orange now. It was no longer the shiny candy color it used to be. The plastic headlight covers were sort of cataract, like an old dog or something. Like they were just completely hazed over. The bodywork was metal, but the sort of nose piece of the Mustang was this McDonald's yellow color, and the paint was mostly missing from that. So it was just this yellow flaking through. This car looked like it had been on the bottom of the ocean, and it's literally 3 days old. So we get back on the road, and, you know, she's not even talking to me at this point. She's convinced we're going to go to jail. And again, like, there's nothing illegal about getting in a sandstorm. This wasn't my fault. This was an act of God, if anything. Maybe God hates Mustangs. I don't know, but it's not my fault. You know, we've lost some time due to the sandstorm, and I'm really trying to get back in time. So we just hurtle through the night, and, you know, somewhere south of Provo, around like Beaver, Utah, the wind picks up again. No sandstorm, but now it's tumbleweeds. They're actually like in the movies. I never even thought that, but they really just these big barrel things just come blowing through. And we're in kind of a hurry, and I'm on the highway, and I'm like dodging them. And it's kind of like a video game. It's like Frogger or something. You know, you see them coming out, and of course it's at night, so they're just kind of coming into the headlights at the last second. I'm trying to swerve around a few, but I don't want to crash the car over a tumbleweed, so I have to hit a few of them. And then eventually I just caught one big one that still had like a big root ball on the bottom of it. And I hit it and I just heard the pop of breaking glass. The headlights were plastic. This was like the fog light in the front of the car. And we get back to Vegas and go back to the stay at the Stardust Casino, which is still around there. Spend a night at the Stardust. Go to take the Mustang back. And again, this is like something out of some 80s movie. I mean, it's like Ferris Bueller's Day Off when Cameron, they launched the Ferrari at the back. This car is totaled. So I go inside and, it's a pretty young guy at the counter. And I just said, hey, man, I'm here to return the Mustang. I've got some bad news. It experienced a sandstorm and a few other mishaps. I'm very sorry, and I just want to work with you, whatever I need to do to make it right. And this guy, I don't know if he just either wasn't a car guy or just was the most laid-back, chill rental car employee, or maybe because it's Vegas, stuff happens to these cars all the time. I don't know. He just kind of looked out and he said, wow, okay, well, you signed the damage waiver, so it's okay. I'm like, okay. Like, do you need to sign something? Like, do you need police report? He's like, no, we got insurance for this sort of thing. You're good, man. And I was like, cool. And just as I'm walking out, his boss comes storming in. What happened to the Mustang? I'm like, oh crap. So I turn around and trying to save this guy who just been so nice to me. I said, sir, I'm very sorry. I rented the car 3 days ago. We got in a sandstorm, experienced another mishap with the tumbleweed and the ground effects, and this was not on purpose, but I could fill out a statement. And so now he's mad. He's talking about calling the police and, this, again, back on the phone again. So he's on the phone with Budget again. And I'm thinking like, man, it wasn't 5 days ago. Somebody else was on the phone with Budget. So, he's on the phone. He's looking out. He's going out, checking the numbers on the car. I'm thinking like, oh my God, they are never going to rent me a car again. So he's not happy, but nothing really could do. And again, this is why you should always get the waiver, whether it's $12, $18 now, get it because you never know. So I go over to the rental desk. I've been at the return desk, go to the rental desk, and I go to pick up the truck that I had reserved, which was supposed to be an F-150, something big enough. It's kind of a pretty big bike I had at the time. But I go to get it, and it's this little like Ford Ranger flare side with the hard tonneau cover on the back, which there's no way this bike is even fitting in the truck, let alone with the tonneau cover. I feel like I'm already on thin ice with Budget, and asking to upgrade my vehicle or what happened doesn't seem like a great idea, but I got no choice. So I go stand in line. Now, the lady in front of me at the rental desk now is some fancy lady from New England somewhere, and she is, or New York or something. She is chewing the lady at the desk out because somebody had brought her rental car around and had not turned the air conditioner on first, and it was hot, and she felt very insulted that she had to get in a hot car. She's chewing this lady out. It's like Steve Martin in Plane, Trains, and Automobiles chewing out the rental desk lady. And, it's not that lady's fault, obviously, but she's taking it like a trooper. So the lady stomps off, and there's an old saying in the South that you catch more flies with honey. So I'm unhappy about being given the wrong vehicle, but it wasn't this lady's fault. So I just kind of, straightened up, and I just said, ma'am, I've come across a little problem with my rental car, and I think you might be the person that could fix it. Can you help me, please? And she said, well, sweetheart, I'd be happy to. So I explained to her the problem, big motorcycle, small truck, asked if I could take the fiberglass cover off. She said, no, those are drilled in. You can't take those off. And she said, well, we have Lincoln Town cars. Do you think it would fit in the trunk? I kind of look out back. This motorcycle was a little over 9 feet long, 3 feet wide. It was not going to fit in the trunk, but I thanked her for the suggestion. I said, well, thank you, ma'am, but I believe it's a little bigger than that. I'm going to need a van or something. And she said, well, what did they give you, that little truck? I said, yes, ma'am. I thought it was going to be a full-size truck, but it turned out to be real little. She said, well, that's just never going to work for you. Well, tell you what, I'll give you a full-size van for the same price as the little truck. I said, that'd be great. Thank you so much. Put the bike in the van, bought some ratchet straps, hooked it in the back, took off cross country. Now we're camping in the van on either side of a motorcycle with like the exhaust here and the straps. In Arkansas, stopped for the night. I went inside to get something to eat. Somebody tried to break into the van, I guess to steal the motorcycle, so they smashed the window out of the van. Now the van's full of broken glass, and I'm thinking like, Budget rental car is gonna kill me. So we make it back to Athens with no mishap. go explain the window in the van. They had actually kind of tried to crowbar the door, broke the glass out of the door. The door's going to have to be replaced. Again, not my fault. I think to this day, there's probably a picture of me somewhere at Budget Rental Car with a red line through it that says, "Do not rent cars to this guy."
I'm pretty sure that the car you have is the Holy Grail. So over the years, I've helped build a lot of cars. And when I say help build them, I've been a parts liaison. With my accent, it opens up doors and allows me to obtain stuff, you know, maybe a little bit easier than an American guy that they hear every other day. They hear a new voice on the phone, they get a little bit excited, they think I'm someone special, doors start opening, and there you go, you know. Over the years, people have kind of gone, "Sam, so you get parts and you help out at the end of builds, but do you actually build anything yourself? You can't build a car, you know. You're in England, man. You don't know nothing about the hot rodding world or custom car building." And, you know, when people say that, it's true. You know what? It's hard to hear it, but it's the truth, you know. You start thinking, "Oh, man, I built this car," you know, or "I've been a part of a team that built this car." And then you start sitting back and going, actually, what have I done? I've helped out a lot with charity, gaining parts, you know, and saving money on the, you know, the down cost of the build. And I've helped put parts in cars that I've owned. And I've helped the snag list, you know, the SEMA crunch list. I've helped with that too, but I physically haven't built anything for the US or the UK. So I got a phone call from one of my buddies who is a stunt driver on Fast and Furious Live. The best way to describe this without upsetting too many people: it was designed for car people, but wasn't designed by car people. The company went bust. Fast and Furious Live went bust. And I got a phone call saying, "There's a private auction coming up. Are you interested in buying any of the cars? I can get you in." I was like, cool. So I sold my 1960 Cadillac Coupe de Ville, like hot chocolate, Detroit steel wheels, on air. Like, it was bad for an English guy to have. Sold that, and I sold my 1970 Dodge Charger that was kind of mine and my dad's. And I had a little bit of money in the bank. And I went on this online auction, and I'm clicking away thinking, I might have an opportunity to buy one of these cars. You know, they're like my iconic dream cars. And there was a real Dennis McCarthy Dodge Charger that I think went for like 80,000 bucks. So there you go, my first dream car, boom, gone, I got no chance. I tried buying some other cars. There's like these little Hayabusa powered buggies that were really cool, and they went crazy as well. So everyone knows Paul Walker's green Mitsubishi Eclipse from the first movie. And I'm looking at it going, nah, that's cool. This is electric powered. It wasn't designed to do 50, 60 mile an hour. It was designed to do 10 miles an hour. These hubcaps would spin to replicate the car was moving, and the road, which was projected on the floor by big projectors, moved behind the car to make it look like it was going fast. And I click on it, £5,000 English, click. 10, 9, 8. Freaking won a car that is like one of the most iconic movie cars in like car history for my era. I won it, you know, and it's looks the part. I mean, the bodywork is phenomenal. It's green. It's got all the stickers in the right place. So this car was a replica built especially for the Fast and Furious Live production. So I carry on bidding. Then this other electric Dodge Charger comes up, and I'm like, well, it's a 1970 Dodge Charger body. Like, they're 20 grand just for a clean body. Like, why not? I'm bidding away. I'm like £5,500, like 72,000 bucks. Boom, I won it. What's going on? Like, I won 2 of the most iconic movie cars in the world. At this point, there was no documentation backing it up. It's just a shell, it's just a prop. Once again, electric motors. You pressed a button, it went up on its back wheels, it went along, smoke machines to hide all the wheelie bar equipment, but it's kind of cool. So I didn't just buy 2 cars at the auction, I bought a 3rd vehicle. After the auction had finished, there's one vehicle that didn't get a bid. It was the Oshkosh Dune truck used when they stole the Di Tommaso Pantera off the train in the train heist. It was basically a mock-up to look like the one in the movie. Once again, it wasn't a film-used vehicle. It had Jeep Cherokee axles that are like 6 feet wide, and the truck's 10 feet wide. Had these big fiberglass wheels that spun and moved up and down to make it look like it was going over the dunes. It had like a $50,000 hydraulic aluminum body that came off the back. So it was designed to take a vehicle off, but never designed to put a vehicle on. So I bought the Dune truck, and we turn up, and somehow I've got to get 3 cars back to Portsmouth, which is a good 4 hours away from where I live, with 1 recovery truck and 1 lorry. So I got the Dune truck on. I'm like, damn it, where am I going to put the Eclipse? So we load the Dodge Charger on. It's too heavy. The body won't lift it on. So we put the Eclipse on and it lifts it on. We get the Eclipse on the back of the dune truck, on the back of a lorry, take it back to the UK. So we're driving down the highway, or the motorway in England as we call it. And I'm looking at the dune truck on the left-hand side with the Eclipse on the back. And I'm like, my life has just changed here. This is like a turning point in my life, my career, my future. If I die tomorrow, it's done. I've done something pretty cool by buying stuff that I don't need with all the money that I do need, but that's fine. We're driving down the street and some guy messages me on Facebook and says, hey, I used to work for Fast and Furious Live and I'm pretty sure that the car you have is the Holy Grail. And I'm like, what do you mean? He says, well, I'm pretty sure there's a title showing that it was owned by Universal City Studios. And I'm like, nah, I don't think so. I think that was probably the Dennis McCarthy build that sold for like 80 grand. He's like, no, check your VIN. So we pull over at the gas station and I start looking at the car and I check the VIN number out and I start going through the paperwork and I've got a copy of the title that says Universal City Studios with my VIN number, black Dodge Charger. And I mean, does it get any more cool than a 1970 Dodge Charger that has been used on Fast and the Furious Live that was owned by Universal Studios? Then I find a receipt showing that it went from Universal Studios to Visual Effects, who's owned by Dennis McCarthy, then sold to Fast and Furious Live. So now I've got documentation proving that my car was a movie-owned vehicle, which is freaking awesome for me, like life-changing, you know, which therefore gives me the idea of moving forward and making something special out of it that's road legal and usable, because therefore I can apply for a title in England and I can drive this car on the road. When I bought the car, I just thought it was a shell. It was cool. It was like the most perfect Dodge Charger body that I could ever dream of owning. Mopars over the years, thanks to the movie franchise, have just gone up in the world. There's no way of you being able to afford one on a normal worker's pay, you know? And to own this car for peanuts and now owe me nothing, I was kind of like in a good position. And people all around the world were like, man, just put engine and tranny in it, stop being a jack. Come on, you're going to ruin it. And I'm like, I don't know. And then as a car guy, you know when you can't do something. Like, it's quite simple. Like, it can or it can't be done. And even if it can be done, it's going to be done to a bad standard that's never going to have any resale value. My lovely lady's laid there in bed. She's like, why don't you do it yourself? I was like, what do you mean? She said, why don't you build a car for SEMA with your sponsors and do something that no one's done? I was like, okay, I'll do it. I met this great guy called Carl from Talk American, and he's a big Mopar guy, you know? And he comes down to my shop, and he's also talking me out of this. He's like, you're a jack. You cannot cut up this Mopar because you're going to ruin your reputation as an American car guy in England. Everyone's going to think you're an asshole. I was like, well, they're probably right, to be fair. They are probably bang on the nail of what I'm thinking about doing. I'm looking for a drivetrain now. So I need something where I can get a chassis rails, or I can do something like Dodge Chargers are a monocoque. So they got the chassis rails built into the frame, and it's not something you can take the body off. Now, this NASCAR was on eBay, and I looked at it. It's like an Outflack 99 Carl Edwards NASCAR. And I'm like, before I even got the Charger, the guy had it up for 20 grand. I was like, that's cool. I want to own a NASCAR, but I can't afford it. I'm hard up, you know? I'm looking at it, and I messaged the guy, I'll give you 10 grand. He's like, no. He comes down 16 grand. 2 weeks go by. I'll give you 10 grand. He's like, 14 grand. I was like, no. Finally, I get it for 10 grand. I go pick it up, and I'm like a 16-year-old kid who's just got his first bicycle or whatever, you know, and I am being an absolute I'm driving this NASCAR round like it is a go-kart. In England, you don't get the opportunity to drive like an idiot because there's no space to. I'm driving it around my estate, doing burnouts, doing donuts on slicks in a NASCAR. I'm like a kid in a candy store. I'm looking at it going, well, hang on, the rear end's like 20 grand, the brakes are 20 grand. People pay 250 grand to build these cars when they're new. Like, you ain't gonna get a better frame to put underneath a car, right? So I'm thinking, why don't I just put the NASCAR underneath the Charger? And you start looking into it and you think, oh, it's just a fiberglass body. We'll take the fiberglass body off. Turns out they're all steel, right? And they're freaking heavy. So, you know, someone spent $250,000 making this thing perform and go around a circle, right? Turn left, turn left, turn left. Cool, let's get a rip saw. So I'm getting rips on it. I'm cutting the body off. I get like, it's $100 junker, you know. I'm cutting the body off. Cut the body off, take the body off as one piece. I sold that. They turned it into a bar. I'm left with the best ever suspension. Dale Earnhardt front suspension. It's got NASCAR emblems all over it. It's got in the tank the race, the year, the date, all scribbled out. That's how it works. What can I do with this car to make it usable? So then I start making an exoskeleton up for the Dodge Charger, and I lift the body off, cut all the floor out, and by this point, I've got a Dodge Charger, which in my head, the body was probably worth 20 grand. Now it's worth maybe a couple of grand just in parts like doors and fenders because I've messed it up to the point of no return. I roll the NASCAR underneath and probably should have checked this before I did it. But, you know, when you're excited about something, you just crack on and either way you got to make it happen. So hurdles get in the way. It's not how you make a problem, it's how you get over it. And I put the NASCAR underneath. Drop it down, roll cage is in the way. Cool, cut the roll cage out of the way. Drop it down, still doesn't fit. Cut more of the roll cage out of the way. Drop it down, cool, my wheelbase is out by 7 inches. You know, the distance between the front and the rear wheel is 7 inches different. I'm like, oh my God, what am I gonna do? So I'm thinking of like moving the axle back, or I'm thinking about moving the front suspension forward. And in the end, I was like, well, hang on, I can just cut it in the middle, extend it 7 inches, extend the prop shaft, brake lines, all this kind of stuff, fuel lines, weld it back together. I work with this guy called Adam, who's a welder. Call him in. He's like, we're going to do this. We're going to cut the chassis in half, and we don't have a jig. We don't have any like expensive equipment, laser lines, or any of this stuff. We're doing this old school hot rod style. We're learning as we're going along, and we cut it in half. And he comes up with this idea of welding these small pieces of angle iron and putting a piece of steel in, right? So that's our length. We know that both sides we have one bar only. We don't have two. We paint it a special color that we don't throw it away and we hang it up out the way. And we weld like 2 little pieces of angle bar and put this bar in. So that's our length at the moment. We then put that bar on the other side, do exactly the same. Then cut the car completely in half. So you can imagine how I'm feeling at this point. I've got a Dodge Charger that is not worth anything. I've got a NASCAR that's in probably 60 to 70 pieces that is not worth anything, apart from all the parts. And I'm like, this is never, ever in my life going back together. Like I've never gone this far before, and now I've gone too far. We cut another piece of steel that's 7 inches longer. We put that in, we brace it up, we jig it all up, weld it all together, measure, check, everything, and it's perfect. Like, it's flawless. And we're like, cool, well, we're achieving something now. Then we start dropping the body down. I start making these inner seals so that they're so perfect that when you drop the Dodge Charger down, it glides on the chassis rails of the NASCAR so that it's a perfect seam fit. So even if you wanted to, you couldn't grab hold of the car and move it in any direction. It's a flawless fit. We use the original firewall for the NASCAR, everything in place. And it gets to the point, well, actually, it's starting to look pretty cool now. I've got these big Goodyear tires hanging out the front fenders. The wheelbase looks amazing. The wheels up inside the wheel arches just looks like something like Dave Kindig would do, you know? They're 27.5 inches tall. If you start working out, that's like a 22-inch rim with some like real low pros on it. You could go pro street with it. You could put some bad big 22s and make it look kind of pro street. And I was thinking, oh my God, this is looking good. I'm trying to get someone to build me a roll cage, yeah? I've never done a roll cage in my life, but I don't want to send it somewhere and pay someone $2,500 to make a roll cage. I want to get someone to come to my shop, bring a pipe bender, like a Mandorel bender, a Bailey one, bring me that, and we'll do it together. I want to learn. This car is going to be built by me, and I'll have help along the way because I ain't no genius, but I want to build it at my shop in my time with my hands. And in a day, from 6 in the morning till 6 at night, we filmed every part of it, and we built this freaking badass roll cage. Drop it down, take it up, drop it down, pick it up. We dropped the body on, I welded it all on. I made the trunk all look OE to fit the original NASCAR chassis. I had sponsors from all around the world. I mean, Cobra Bucket Seats in the UK, they phoned me up and like, we hear you're building something pretty crazy. I was like, yeah. Well, would you consider putting our seats in it? I was like, yeah. Everyone's heard about Cobra Bucket Seats. I mean, they're built well, they're race approved. They must be doing something right to still be around. Then Schroff Racing, who work with Cobra, sent me these like 4-inch wide NASCAR 8-point harnesses, like over the top, but it just works. You start going through things, everything just falls together. You know, Mickey Thompson, I phoned him, I was like, well, I need a tire I can drive across America in, but I want them 27.5 inches high, I want them 12 inches wide, I want them by 15. They're like, well, we do this, but they're 28 inches high, but they're a little bit narrower. And I was like, but the problem is, you can't really get cooler than Goodyear Eagle tires, right? But when they're like 3 mil thick NASCAR tires, you hit a stone or a nail, you're gonna have a blowout. You know, especially on snow, you can't drive in slicks. So Mickey Thompson sent me these tires, and I basically contacted the head of marketing. And I said, I want the logos from 1968 to 72. And they sent them to a company called Tire Stickers, who made me up these NASCAR-esque bright yellow logos, which basically copy the fact of the NASCAR Eagle NASCAR tires, but now I'm on tires that can actually get me across America, you know? And the whole thing is starting to come together. I've got the right wheels on it. I've got an audio system in it. Like, who puts, okay, I can tell you who puts an audio system in a NASCAR. This jack. I think I must be the only man in the world that puts an audio system in a NASCAR. I met this guy who owns Speed Dog, DAWG, who make these custom bad gear shift balls, right? He said to me, Sam, if you ever want anything and you're bringing something to SEMA, just let me know. So I'm like, well, I got Dominic Toretto's Dodge Charger. I got it on Carl Edwards' NASCAR chassis. And Paul Walker's not with us anymore, right? So how can I do something in this car that is going to be kind of cool? So I contacted him. I said, I got this idea of a shifter ball, and I asked everyone, and everyone says my idea was stupid. So it just gave me more ammunition to move forward with my plan. I sent it to him, and I want to do 1, too fast, 3, for Paul, because it's for Paul Walker, because he's not with us anymore, and that was a big stepping stone, like, you know, him being gone from the franchise for me, and too fast because it's like Too Fast, Too Furious. So when you read it, you got 1, Too Fast, 3 for Paul, but when you read it, it says Too Fast for Paul, because the Dodge Charger was always Too Fast for Paul. I sent the logo back on like a sketch drawing on like a napkin in a restaurant. I take a picture and send it to him. He's like, bad. It's like, cool. What are you going to do with it? I was like, I'm going to take it to SEMA. He's like, cool. Let me contact Mopar and see if they endorse this as a one-off gear shift knob in the world. Mopar endorsed it. It's got Charger written down the side of it. And it just is mind-blowing. Like, you sit in it, and the car's cool, the seat's cool. You got this bright white shift knob with 2 lines with the logo on it. And it's just amazing. And then to be able to show Cody Walker what I did, him to sign the dashboard, it was kind of quite emotional for me, because I looked up to Paul Walker so much. Like, even you don't get to know the guy, you don't know him, you'll never meet him, but for what he represented as a human being, a nice guy, someone that had a young family, someone that did stuff for charity, kind of like hit home a lot for me. I think I'm a nice guy. I help out charities. He's a car guy. He's in a movie that you idolize. And for him to pass away at such a young age, it really shows you how precious life is. And I want to do something in this car. I kind of remembered him, because the only reason I'm here today is because of the love of the movies that he was in at the beginning. So, you know, to do that shift knob is pretty cool. The dream. I built, let's call it now, the NAS Charger. Yeah? NASCAR-powered Dodge Charger, documented by Universal Studios, raced by Carl Edwards. I mean, does it get cooler than a road-going NASCAR?
And somebody goes, what's that going to cost? They go, $1 billion with a B in 1965. There was a time, believe it or not, where Chrysler made huge advances in actually trying to build a turbine car for the public. Turbine-powered car. Now, some people have heard of this, but most people don't know the extent that Chrysler went in this project. And that's the startling thing, because back in the 1950s, a guy came to Chrysler, an engineer, who said, you know something, they're making great strides in turbine technology, and there were turbine aircraft, there were fighter craft powered by turbines during World War II on all sides. Germans had them, the British had them, and Americans were building them shortly thereafter. So turbine-powered aircraft were becoming very well known. And somebody said, why don't we put one in a car? And so Chrysler said, you know something, we've always experimented with different things. Sure, knock yourself out. So they set up a little turbine division in Highland Park. Consider putting a turbine engine in a car. So they got to work, and they actually built a turbine engine that was fairly small compared to what you'd see in, like, say, an airplane. And it was an automotive turbine, so it had to have some different things done. It had to be a better casing, for instance, in case one of the blades separated, as they say, at high speed. And so they actually built a turbine engine that they could connect up with a transmission and power a car with, and they dropped it into a car in 1953. Most people know that Chrysler was building turbine cars in the 60s, but they put one on the road in 1953. The guy in charge of the program was a guy named George Hubner. George Hubner was an engineer, but very, very flashy engineer. And I jokingly tell people that he was an extroverted engineer, which is something that doesn't exist very much in nature. And he loved publicity. So he would actually call up the press and go, hey guys, I got a jet-powered car, you want to see it? And a whole swarm of reporters would show up. He'd demonstrate the turbine-powered car. So he realized people love this stuff because cars, after the war was over, you know, people were buying cars, but there hadn't been any major changes in automotive technology that were this kind of seismic changes. So the idea that there'd be a jet-powered or turbine-powered car would really cause people to go, really? That's crazy. And the interesting thing about a turbine engine in a car is they sound like a turbine engine in an aircraft. George Hubner realized people love this idea. But the cool thing about turbine engines is they have fewer moving parts than a piston engine. They don't reciprocate, they spin. So they run smoother. Fewer moving parts, they run smoother. And oh, by the way, they'll run on anything that burns. So they would do demonstrations where they'd run it on alcohol, kerosene, home heating oil, VO5 hairspray, tequila, peanut oil, vegetable. They would do these demonstrations and show it's multi-fuel. The weird part is that in the 50s and 60s, nobody cared. Gasoline was cheap. It's like saying I have an alternative to water. You go, it comes out of the wall when I turn this faucet. I don't need an alternative to water. Gasoline was the same thing back then. So nobody really cared about the multi-fuel aspect of it right away. So Chrysler has the turbine car. George Hubner's promoting it. He's hoping that if he can get enough people in the public to want the car, he can convince Chrysler to start building the cars and selling the cars. There's a major problem though, because turbine engines are very, very picky in their, how they're made up. They need to have, exotic metals, very, very precision parts. So there is something that they have to work out with this, with the technology, but it's doable. So they get the first car on the road. It seems to be running fine. Upgrade the engine. They eventually had a 7th generation engine. So 7 generations as they improved along the way. So second or third one they build, George Hubner announces, just so you guys understand how serious we are at Chrysler about building turbine engines, we're going to actually drive one cross country. So they brought a turbine-powered car to New York City, had a thing on the side, cross-country turbine trip. George Hubner's in the front seat, holds a press conference to everybody, and they drive it cross-country. Everywhere they go, they're doing interviews, TV, radio, newspapers show up. It's a huge publicity event that's unbelievable. People are clamoring for turbine-powered cars. The weird thing is that Chrysler's hinting they're going to build them, but they've never talked about how expensive they're going to be or anything like that. But it's something that George Hubner's convinced will happen if he gets enough ground support for this. So somewhere along the line, early 1960s, he gets permission to build a fleet of turbine-powered cars. They actually engage Ghia in Italy to build the cars. Elwood Engel, who recently come from Ford to Chrysler, designs the cars. And he designs a car that's specifically going to be nothing but a turbine car. Up until this point, they dropped the turbine engines in other cars they built. Now they've got a specific purpose-built car that's going to be a turbine-powered car. And they call it the turbine car. So they build 55 of these cars in Italy. They ship them over here. They bring them to a plant in Detroit where they tear them apart. They put powertrains in them, reassemble them, and they announce that if you want to drive a turbine car for 2 months, contact Chrysler, and we're going to draw the names of various people at random, and you might get to drive a turbine car for a couple months as just part of this huge project. They got so much attention, mountains of postcards being sent in. It got all this attention, and they started doing this. They started delivering cars to people. So they'd call you up and say, hey, congratulations, you get a turbine car for 2 months. And they'd come to your house, and oh, by the way, we're going to call the press. They're going to be there too. Hold a press conference in your front yard of us handing the keys over, demonstration, maybe let the journalists take it for a drive. But for 2 months, you get to drive it. All you got to do is put fuel in it. If it breaks down, give us a call. But other than that, just drive it around. I interviewed people who got those cars. They said for 2 months, they were rock stars. Everywhere they went, people would look because it sounds like a low-flying airplane. You look, and the car is distinctive looking. 54 of the cars were painted turbine bronze. It's a really cool looking car, really cool sounding car. I spoke to people who said they would go to the store to buy like a loaf of bread and come out and be a crowd of people around the car. They have to show them the car, fire the car up, take people for drives, drive it around. I know people who said they got so sick of it, they hid the car. They'd come home from work, put it in the garage, close the door, A guy told me he forgot to close the garage door, and he looked outside, and there was a school bus stopped, and all the kids were coming up to look at his car. So they got all this publicity for a couple of years. People were going insane. They wanted to buy these cars. Chrysler was getting people contacting saying, I don't care what the price is. I want to buy one. Here's a check, sending them down payments. I want one of these cars. Well, here's the thing. They knew how much it cost to build the cars. They're built in Italy, but they could build cars in America much cheaper. So the car cost is not that bad. The car actually had a torque flight transmission in it, which is what Chrysler was using at the time. So they had off-the-shelf technology for that. What really mattered, though, was the cost of the engine. And they had done a lot of work through the first 4 generations of the turbine engine. This is the 4th generation turbine engine in the Ghia. They, for instance, inside a turbine have a bunch of fan discs, which have fan blades on them. And if you look in the front end of an airplane's jet engine, you'll see the fan blades. Well, the fan blades have to be really, really perfectly balanced and so on to make sure the thing spins properly. Chrysler had actually developed technology where they could cast those. They could cast a disc as a single casting. So it's going to save them a ton of money. But they did not have any infrastructure in place to start manufacturing turbine engines. So somebody actually said, you know, you got to build a factory from the ground up just to build these engines. And somebody goes, what's that going to cost? They go, $1 billion with a B in 1965. And so they go, that's not going to work. So I interviewed the guy who made the call. They actually called up a guy who is a pricing guy in Chrysler. And they would often bring him in and say, hey, what would it cost us to, and they'd give him a hypothetical, you know, take that engine and put it in that car. What's it going to cost us if we wanted to make that car like a foot shorter, whatever, you know. And they actually said, dude, it's your job. Find out what it's going to cost to mass produce turbine engines and stick them in cars. And he went and contacted all the various people. And the lowest estimate he got was $10,000 per engine. So he went back and he said, okay, guys, here's the problem. 318, typical off-the-shelf V8, it's a couple $100. Turbine engine, 10 grand. There's no way that you can possibly sell these to the public and break even, let alone turn a profit. No one will buy them that expensive. So they kind of buried those numbers and those stories in the press, and they just said, well, we're still working on it. We're still working on it. And the weird thing that happens, though, right around this time is that the federal government starts clamping down on tailpipe emissions. And the turbine engine, which will burn on anything, it'll burn anything, gasoline, kerosene, diesel, doesn't matter. The tailpipe emissions were something they never worried about. But they started clamping down on things like NOx emissions. And it turns out that that's one of the things that the turbine engine doesn't do real well with. And many companies, for instance, started going with catalytic converters to solve this problem. And there was almost no way for them to go back and re-engineer the turbine engine to be as good as it was, along with the tailpipe emissions that they never saw coming. Plus, Chrysler had its first financial troubles shortly thereafter, the first time they almost went bankrupt. So Chrysler downsized their turbine program. They called back in the 55 cars that they had out there. Many people saw those cars. For instance, they had the car at the World's Fair, and they gave people rides in the World's Fair. The car was all over the news, Time Magazine, New York Times. Everybody had stories about the Chrysler, amazing Chrysler jet car, turbine car, whatever they called it. They continued building upgraded versions, 5th version, 6th version, and they actually built their last turbine car in 1983. And they had this turbine-powered car that ran just fine. But the problem they had with it is they could never get the cost of the engine itself down to a point where it made sense. And so if you were thinking about buying a car and somebody said, okay, you can buy a piston-engined car over here or put a turbine engine, you know, for $10,000 upgrade, who's going to take that? And interestingly enough, it wasn't until the very end of the program where somebody said, oh, by the way, it's multi-fuel. What? You know, and so there's photographs later where they actually show the car hooked up to a display that's got all these different fuels on it that it can burn, but nobody worried about that previously. So the program wound up getting mothballed. In all, Chrysler built 77 or 78 turbine cars total. The bronze car, the turbine that actually says turbine on it, they built 55 of those. 54 of them were bronze. One of them was white. The cars were built in Italy. They're being imported into America. At that time, they had a choice to make when you import something from Italy. You had to either say, we're going to pay full import duties on it, or we're going to bond them and guarantee that we either ship them back out of the country or we destroy them. So Chrysler, when they brought over the 55 cars from Italy, had a choice to make. Are we going to want to keep all 55 of these? If so, we have to pay. So they actually only paid to keep about 10 of them. The other 46 were crushed and burned at a scrapyard in Romulus, Michigan. And I interviewed a guy who was there, and he said, "You've never seen more grown men cry." Literally crying, because they designed this car. It was hand built in Italy by Ghia, and these things were works of art, and they had this space age power plant. Now they pulled the motors out of them because the motors weren't imported. So you can keep the turbines out, but they destroyed the cars. Of the 9 cars that remained, they actually offered them to museums. Said, if you want one, you can have one. So for instance, the Natural History Museum in Los Angeles has got one. The St. Louis Museum of Transportation's got one. The Smithsonian has got one. 2 of them found their way into private hands. Jay Leno's got one. And there's a private collector in Indiana who's got one because one of the cars got sold to a museum. The museum sold it at an auction. Tom Monahan, the pizza guy, bought it. He sold it, and then later on, that guy got it. The sad part is that some of the cars that are out there don't run. So there's one at the Detroit Historical Museum that doesn't run. It was sent there with just the casing for the engine, but the internals are missing. Jay Leno's runs. And in fact, I've had the opportunity to drive it, which is very nice of him to let me do that. And it's really, really cool. Went out to his place in California. We went for a drive. He drove first, and then we switched. Want to drive my car? Sure. Driving around. And the cool thing is I've owned a Chrysler product from that era. I owned a 69 Dodge Charger when I was in high school. I know how the steering felt. I know how the transmission felt. This car ran just like that. It felt just like that, but it sounded different. We're driving down the street in Burbank and people's heads are snapping around. It sounds like there's a low-flying airplane coming in, a jet coming in, but it's not loud. It's not like it's so loud that it'll blow your mind, but it's the whistling, whooshing sound. It sounds like a big vacuum cleaner, right? And so it's one of those things where it was so unusual, but so cool. The tachometer goes to 60,000 RPM. Red line is 60. The temperature gauge goes up into the thousands because it's not measuring coolant temperature. It's measuring the temperature at the ignition point in the combustion chamber. You know, that's what you measure on a jet apparently. So there's so much cool technology that goes into this. But right now, Chrysler still has 2 of them. I've actually gotten to drive one of those as well. And the interesting thing is that all these bronze turbine cars, they're all identical, including the same key will start each and every one of them. And the reason I know that is that I interviewed the guy who delivered the cars to the different people who used the cars. That program, by the way, where they lent the car out, 203 different families had the car. They put over 1 million miles cumulatively on those cars with almost no problems. It proved that they were viable. They're expensive, but they were viable. But Bill Carey, the guy I interviewed, who's in the cover of my book, by the way, Bill Carey told me, he goes, one key would start them all. He goes, otherwise it'd be a nightmare. Trying to remember which key goes what. Because ever have a fleet of cars, they all look alike. You can't say this one goes to the bronze turbine. They're all bronze, you know. So it was a fascinating concept. It was a fascinating project. And like I said, most people have heard maybe about the turbine car in the middle. But they started in 53 and ran through 83. And they built 77 turbine cars. But the primary one is the bronze one in the middle. They had that fleet of cars that they lent to the public. And Chrysler didn't spend a penny, for the most part, on advertising those cars, and they got millions and millions of dollars of free publicity because the turbine car project in the middle was basically a gigantic publicity stunt.
There is no way that a police department would sell you a full code police car. You can buy anything you would like to on eBay. And for some reason, I went searching for a Crown Victoria. Now, Doug tells stories about Crown Victorias. Arnie seems to love Crown Victorias. And Crown Victorias are usually nothing but trouble. But for some reason, we all love them too. So I went shopping for an Indiana sheriff car. And truckers call them Indiana waffle monsters because they are brown and tan. So they look like waffles and syrup. I minded my own business. Now, circa this is about 14 years ago, and came across a 98 Ford Crown Victoria sheriff car. And it still said sheriff, real big on the side of it, brown and tan. It was just an online auction bid, and it's county sheriff car, stars, everything, decals, full code police car. What had happened, it was Miami County, Indiana, northern Indiana, and they were gonna run it in the demolition derby, because it had a 4.6 in it and it had a bit of a knock and they were just gonna beat it to death. But for some reason, they did not run it in the county fair. and the officer that still had it put it up for auction on eBay. And you can still, yes, buy everything you would like, find it on eBay. So I bid, and I was the high bidder on a full code Indiana Waffle Monster sheriff car. About 14 years ago, of course, my daughter at that time, 10, 11 years old, and she loved cameras. And her first tattoo was a 35 millimeter on her foot. I was always more of a best friend than a dad, which sometimes is not the best thing to be. But I took her with me everywhere. I said, Kate, I bought this sheriff car up in northern Indiana. We had truck and trailer. Let's go. And of course, she had digital camera that day, and she went and did her own thing and kind of just took pictures out the window and everything. We get up there to this kind of like an impound lot, like a bullpen, and this gentleman's waving me in, you know, come on in. And I back into this lot, and there it is, brown and tan. Decals are still on it. Still says County Sheriff on the back of it. And I'm thinking, man, this cat would have taken the decals off of it before I picked it up. I handed him the loot. Time to go. He drives it right up on top of the trailer. I strap it down. Life is good. And he waves me, see you later, goodbye. I get to US 31. He goes north. I go south. I bought a full code Indiana sheriff car on eBay. So I go home and take it off the trailer, and it's knocking to beat. I mean, it's not good. At that point, I'm thinking, man, let's drop a motor in this thing. You know, I bought it. Let's do it. So I bought another Crown Vic, took a motor out, dropped a motor in it, and I'm driving. I've got a full code Indiana sheriff car, and I am out on the town in this thing. There was a lot of things that I didn't know you can get away with in a sheriff car. I didn't realize you get free McDonald's in a sheriff car. I didn't realize you get free car washes in a sheriff car. There's a lot of cool things you get away with in a sheriff car. I had one of those dare to keep your kids off drugs license plate on the back, and I was so bold where the personalized license plate says donut on it. And so I'm whipping around in an Indiana sheriff car, full code, everything down the side, still says sheriff, tinted windows, and a donut license plate, and other sheriffs are like waving at me like, howdy. And I was a club disc jockey back then. I'd drive it to the club. I'd drive it everywhere. John Schneider from Dukes of Hazzard, he needed a trip to Metropolis, Illinois, because he was Jonathan Kent on Smallville, Superman's father, drove the sheriff car. When we unveiled the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard down in Georgia, drove the sheriff car down there. When we did the Blues Brothers trip in 2005, one of my friends drove the sheriff car and directed traffic with it in downtown Chicago. I drove that car so often, and in Indiana, police officers can't have goatees. They can't have facial hair. And I'm just whipping around, standard goatee, waving at officers, this, that, and other. At the time, I had a friend that lived up in Crawfordsville, Indiana, and that's 20 miles or so outside of Indianapolis. And I drove him home, and it was cold, snowing, and a mess out. And after I dropped him off, I got on the highway and heading back home, and right on the exit ramp, the old black ice, the old full code Crown Vic, did a couple donuts down the middle of the highway, went behind a guardrail, and then it couldn't get back up on the highway because I was in between valley and the old Crown Vic sitting there with the headlights pointing out, snow everywhere, buried deep. So Officer Travis here gets out of his car, shuts the door, and I make my way up the kind of the embankment behind the snow, step over the guardrail, and here comes an Indiana state trooper. I'm like, oh man, this couldn't be any worse than it already is. And it's about 2:15 a.m. And he says, "You're a little out of your jurisdiction, aren't you?" And I'm like, buddy, if you only knew I was a little out of my... I was like, yeah, hit a little black ice coming off the exit ramp there, and here's where we're at. And I said, I'm thinking I'm going to go up here to this truck stop, because there's a truck stop at the exit ramp, and see if I can't just get somebody to pull this thing out. Get on in. So Officer Travis gets in with the state trooper. He takes me back to the truck stop, and he says, all right, partner, hey, when you get in there, ask for Tom. He runs the tow truck, and he'll pull you out. Is Tom here? There's Tom. Hey, Crown Vic, the sheriff car. He said, oh, yeah, I heard it come on the radio. Get on in. Took me back to the Crown Vic. It was a bit of a challenge to get it all the way back up the ravine and out. He got it out, fired up the old Crown Vic, and I said, "Partner, where were we at?" He said, "Sir, you have a good day." And cut me loose. We got away with everything in the sheriff car. So it kind of sat for a little while, and we had a big time with it. One day I needed to drive it somewhere. We were working on the exhaust for the Cannonball Run ambulance or something. I got in the sheriff car because we had driven it everywhere. And little did I know that I had let the plate go expired. And so I'm whipping down through Johnson County, Indiana to the exhaust shop, minding my own business in my sheriff car, and I got pulled over by a real sheriff. And by the time I was out of it and had my hands on the side of it, I had every officer that was on duty that day in Johnson County, including Whiteland and New Whiteland, Indiana, and half of Greenwood, and had me on the side of the car. And they said, of course, I'm impersonating a police officer. I explained to the arresting officer that I had purchased the vehicle this way. And he said, there is no way that a police department would sell you a full code police car. I had the auction printed off and put it in the glove box. And I said, "Sir, I bought this car this way. This is my car." Of course, it gets towed in and it's gone because it has expired license plates. They did not take me to jail, but they gave me some time that day to prove that I purchased it that way. So I basically went to the police department with the auction that I took out of the glove box. And lo and behold, the arresting officer's already there, beat me there. I had to wait for someone to pick me up. And I said, "Here's the auction. I bought it this way." He said, "Mr. Bell, I've called Miami County, Indiana, and they did not sell you that car that way. Not only that, we called the Ford dealership that they took it to where the motor was determined to be bad, and the Ford dealership also said there was no decals on that car when it came here. So unless you have something else, you'll be hearing from the prosecutor, and we're filing charges for impersonating a police officer." They swore up and down that I re-decaled the car and put a motor in it, and I was cruising around impersonating a police officer. So I went back to the house, and I was in some crap. But if you remember, I took my daughter with me that day, and she had a digital camera, and she took a picture of the police officer driving it up on my trailer. So I went home, and I printed out all of the photos of the officer that swore up and down he didn't sell it to me that way, and the Ford dealership that swore up and down it had no decals on it, and I was able to prove that I bought it that way. So I went back to New Whiteland, and on the way there, I went ahead and paid for the license plates at the Bureau of Motor Vehicles on the way so I can pick up my car. And I just calmly laid down every photo of this police officer, and it didn't matter what he said. He sold it to me that way. And at that point in time, the officer had nothing he can either A, hold my car on, or B, hold Mr. Bell for. So I got the release and went and got my car out of the impound. And the guys at the impound were just dumbfounded that they would give me my car back. And at the time, the prosecutor in Johnson County, Indiana, wrote me a letter and said, "Put this in your glove box because you bought it this way. So if you ever get pulled over in it again, hand them this because I don't want to go through this all over again." So they gave me my car back, proving that the Miami County deputy and officer lied, proving that the Ford dealership up in northern Indiana lied, and I never, ever, ever drove the car again, drove it straight home. Of course, I've talked about Herbie the Love Bug and Cinema Vehicle Services and movie places. The picture car rental people are always looking for police cars. And I had a perfectly good, already decaled up, running and driving Indiana sheriff car. So I called one of my friends that are still in the business, and he purchased the car from me because I had got away with murder. And then there was like a weird Quentin Tarantino movie called Grindhouse, and it had Planet Terror and like Death Proof on it. So if you watch Planet Terror, There is an Indiana sheriff car in Planet Terror that gets blown up, and that was the fate of that police car. Here's where I say something clever, and now you roll the music. I don't know how I orbit around Hazard County, but somehow Travis Bell, for years, was the mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard. During this obsession of the television show and cars flying and things going on, I realized that the first 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard were filmed in Georgia, and you can still visit the sites. It pretty much is all still there, but in the late 90s and early 2000s, it really still looked the same. Because granted, the show had filmed down here in '78. So we would come down from Indianapolis and just bang around and drive General Lee's around and go play the Dukes of Hazzard. And of course, you know, down here, and they're like, hey, it's Bo and Luke. And they're like, hey, you know, nothing to see here. But then we wanted to find the people that worked on the show. And we would actually make these little beautiful flyers with a wanted poster that says, if you were here this day when the car flew, call this number or whatever else. And we put them in little diners, and where the cars flew, there's obviously telephone poles and stuff. We'd take this 20-foot ladder and put this sign up. It says, if you were here on this day, blah, 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 when the car flew. And people would call. They said, yes, they held the school bus up that day just to jump the car down the street. And Mom and Dad were so mad because I was late from school. And they had all these great stories. And then we started finding the people that painted the cars in and around Conyers, Georgia, and Covington, and Snailville, Georgia, and all these other places. And then we found the transportation directors, and they were like going, oh, now we got these gold mine people. And we had this fellow's name. His name was Don Schischler. And Don Schischler has won Academy Awards, and he was a director and second unit DP. And he had no reason to be nice to me. I was just some idiot that was obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard. And I pull into this lot where all these camera cars are, and there's these little bitty short buses, yellow school buses, and a bunch of blue Ford Tauruses. And some had the front end knocked off of them. One had all 4 wheels off of them. And I was like, what on God's green earth? And he's come out and introduced him. I said, all these? He said, movie Road Trip, Sean William Scott, whatever. And I'm like, yeah. And he said, these are all the Tauruses from Road Trip. There's the short buses. We got to go crush all these things and get paid for these things. I'm like, this guy's awesome. And I go, tell me about the Dukes of Hazzard. Tell me about all this stuff. And he said, well, December 23rd, 1978, I had 51 totaled vehicles after 5 episodes of the Dukes of Hazzard. And I go, what did you do with them all? You know? He said, there's a transmission recycling shop in Dawsonville, Georgia, and his name is Shaw Recycling. And I called Cliff Shaw 2 days before Christmas, 1978, and he came and picked them all up. I said, all of them? He said, all of them. I'm like, well, when was the last time you talked to Cliff Shaw? He said, the 23rd of December, 1978. And I go, it's time for a family reunion. Like, let's go. So sure enough, as if this guy hasn't been entertaining enough to this idiot that's obsessed with the Dukes of Hazzard, after Don Schischler had driven around all these Wagon Queen family trucksters from National Lampoons, he had this terrible black Suburban with a gun turret on the roof of it. And it was from some terrible, terrible Cindy Crawford, Baldwin brother bad guy movie. And this was the Russians of the bad guy car. But that was his car now. So we all get in the terrorist Suburban and head off toward Dawsonville, Georgia. And he's telling us this story that Cliff Shaw and the Shaw family live in this beautiful part of Dawsonville, Georgia, just down the street from Bill Elliott's shop. But there's a nuclear locomotive buried there. And they're the only ones that live on this street. It's either a nuclear plane or a nuclear locomotive, but it is buried at the end of Lumpkin Campground Road in Dawsonville, Georgia, and there's not very many people that live there because of this thing. And I'm like thinking, where on God's green earth is he taking us to? And he knew right where he lived. So we pull up down this hill or down this country road. I mean, you can imagine it in your mind. And up to the left was this gravel road that went up the hill toward this smaller home, but there was cars everywhere as far as the eye could see, all the way up the hill. And from make and model you can think of, older, but just what mythical junkyards are made of, and just trees growing up through them and everything. We're just looking for any remnants of the Dukes of Hazzard. We bang on the door up there. The lady comes to the door and says, hey, Cliff Shaw, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Cliff's not home from work yet. And hey, Don Schischler. And Don, on the way there, he said, look, I'm going to run traffic for you if they say it's here and you just go walking in their yard to see if you can find this thing. We're talking acres. I decided to chime in and say, hey, we're looking for things from the Dukes of Hazzard of all things. Remember Mr. Schischler here? He was a little family reunion there. And she goes, you looking for the old Dodge Charger car? And I'm like, she could have said a bad guy car. She could have said police car. She could have said Boss Hogg's Cadillac. She could have said anything. But yes, we are looking for the old Dodge Charger car. And she goes, if you walk back down the driveway at the second Pinto, mind you, not the first one, hang a left and start walking in toward the road. And I turned on a video camera and there was a green 1969 Dodge Charger. And in the first episode of the Dukes of Hazzard, they jumped Lee 1 over Roscoe's police car. And of course, it didn't land well, but the body shop would remove the doors off of it because that kept them from having to paint new 01s on another car. And they remove everything that they can use, but then another episode of the Dukes of Hazzard called for a wrecked race car. So they repainted the first General Lee green and put 71s on it and put John Merende on the roof, which was the transportation coordinator. So I had just found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard. As I walk around and the door was welded shut on one side and gone on the other side, and it's orange where the door jamb is and the roll cage is still mostly in it. There's a VIN number, which is XP29, blah, 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 any Dodge Charger. And there's a little bitty, label maker. It says LEE1. And then I knew I had found the first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard with a Los Angeles parking sticker still on it and all these other things. What do? You are the biggest Dukes of Hazzard moron from any zip code you can come up with. So old Cliff comes home. I heard him drive past me up the driveway, and I'm down there trying to keep my tongue in my mouth going. And this thing is a disaster. It's got more pine needles on it than any national forest you can think of. The motor's in it, the transmission's in it somehow. And it's, still orange where it's supposed to be. It still has a 71. You open up the trunk, and it still has all the concrete in the trunk from when they jumped the car, because it was a big block car, and they jacked it up in the middle of the car, and of course the nose would be heavy, so they put quickcrete concrete in it until it leveled out, and that's how they made ballast in the back of the car. And that's how they flew the General Lees, and that's why they don't land nose first. So I go walking up the driveway, and I just can't believe, of all things, I expected a bad guy car, cooter truck, anything, but the General Lee. I found the first General Lee. So Cliff was interesting. He was a very good old boy, super nice gentleman. I said, hey, Cliff, the old Dodge Charger, the green one down the street. He goes, oh, the General Lee. I'm like, oh, man. When he's thinking that's just some old wrecked race car. He knew it was the General Lee. I'm like, dang. And he goes, oh, the two Roscoe police cars are over the hill. I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. Sure enough, over the hill, past the goats, Roscoe, both police cars, police 1 and 2 sitting there. I come back up, and it was getting a little dark out, and Don had his family reunion with him. He had ran the traffic like he said he was going to for me. And I said, hey, General Lee for sale? Like, can I take all these out of here? No, the grandson, Cliff's grandson, was into the Dukes of Hazzard. And I'm like going, yeah, but this is it is a mess. And I said, well, all right, no amount of money. And it's, Travis, you have yourself a safe drive home now, whatever. And so I knew his grandson's name, and I knew his address. So I went home and started a little plan on how on God's green earth to get this car. So every 2 or 3 weeks, 2 or 3 months, I would send his grandson something in the mail. A little 3-pack of General Lee cars, Roscoe Cooter, Enos car, whatever else. Sent it in the mail. An autographed picture from John Schneider. Sent it in the mail. I'd place a call about every 6 months, and I'd say, oh, we sure do appreciate you sending. Zach, sir, loves this, and blase that, and no problem. So after, model kits, and I just put them in the mail. I called his wife one Friday, and I said, hey, did Zach get the Daisy Jeep thing or whatever. And she said, oh yeah, we sure do appreciate it. He's in there putting it together now, or XYZ. Finally had enough. After about 8-10 months, a year of doing this, it's time to ask if we can buy the car again. And so I said, hey, I sure would like to come down and talk to Cliff about that car. Oh yeah, if you're ever in the area, you should come on down, stop on by. And that is my green light that someone has approved me to come down there and talk about that car. And so I immediately called friends in South Carolina, and they had a flatbed roll-off truck, and they didn't live far away. And I had another friend in Chicago. I didn't have a trailer at the time, and I said, I don't care what it takes, just get down here. And this was a Friday, and Friday turned into driving all day and night. Saturday, we pulled down Lumpkin Campground Road, or where the nuclear locomotive is, and here comes Mr. Shaw down the driveway in an Astro van. And this driveway, of course, is up the hill, and it's gravel, and nothing stops well on gravel. It comes to a stop. And I said, hey, Cliff. Hey, June. I'm here to talk to you about this car. And Cliff turned into some guy I didn't know. And yelled at me like I was his child. And I don't work on Sundays. Who told you to come down here? And I said, well, June just told me on Friday to come down. And she's like, yeah, and he's a very religious man, doesn't work on Sundays, not going to have anything to do with some Yankee down there cruising around his property. And I said, well, Cliff, I drove all night, and I really want to talk to you about this car. And he rolled the windows up, and he said, it's buried back there. You can see what you can do. And that was my green light. He didn't know I had a tow truck around the corner. So we moved a whole bunch of cars, and it was raining, and it was on the hill, and it was not good. And we pulled Lee 1 up on a flatbed with big old railroad ties and got it up there and got it out and parked it there at the bottom of his driveway. And it took hours, but he was at church. I saw him coming back down the road, and I don't know if he's going to tell me to fly a kite, get this thing out of here. What are you doing on my property? And he drove right past us and up the driveway. And I'm like going, oh, Mr. Shaw is pissed off. So everybody's looking at me like, what are you going to do? You got to go talk to him, Travis. I'm like, dude, this guy's... all right. So here he comes down overalls, and he said, Travis, I apologize for being so ill towards you today. The NASCAR race is on. Why don't you come up here and sit down and watch this with me, and we'll talk about that car. And he must have got some religion at church, felt bad about it. And I was like going, all right. So I'm like, Mr. Shaw's saying, let's go watch a NASCAR race. And we get up there, and an outside TV and old box TV and a little picnic table. After watching a couple laps of this race, I was like, Cliff, I got a heck of a drive home. I said, I want to talk to you about what I'm going to give you for this car. He said, well, what do you offer me for it? Being the shrewd negotiator that I am, I handed him a pen, and I said, you write a number on your hand, and I'm going to write a number on my hand. And we're going to turn them over, and whatever we're apart, then we know where we're going to start at. And so I had 3 eyes looking over my shoulder on what I was going to write on my hand. And Mr. Shaw, he didn't even think about it. So I wrote $300 on my hand. He could have told him he want $30,000 for the car. I had no idea. He rolled his hand over. I rolled my hand over. He wrote $500 on his hand. So I bought the very first General Lee from the Dukes of Hazzard for $400. And then he said, you can have the other police cars for the same money too. So we're talking $1,200 for all of the 3 original police cars from the Dukes of Hazzard. So we took it home. We kept it in its green paint with the 71s, and it was known on the TV show as the Richard Petty wrecked race car. And we kept it like that for a long time, but people started picking paint off of it because they wanted a souvenir from the first General Lee. Or picking the roll bar padding. You couldn't take it anywhere because it's painted with lead paint. And Dukes of Hazzard fans letting their kids climb in this thing, and they probably, 3 of them's probably dead now from being inside that thing. So it was a mess. It was very, very bad. And I had 4 Dukes collectors from Ohio contact me and said, Travis, would you sell the first General Lee? I said, everything's for sale. What would you like? And they made me a good offer. I split the money, true to form, and a man of my word. With my friend from Chicago, he drove a trailer down there and made half. It was no longer my car, and I didn't have to worry about it anymore. Then another gentleman called and said, Travis, I'm in the market for a General Lee because for some reason the Mecca of the Dukes of Hazzard was in Indianapolis, and my name was all over every message board, and I had found the first General Lee, and I was arranging all this stuff. But he wanted a real car. And I said, man, there were 17 real General Lees left in the world. They're all in various conditions. They're very expensive. They're very impossible to drive, because this is, you know, if you want something to drive and go to your car shows, don't buy it. But he was adamant. About the same time, the guys from Ohio called back and said they'd broken up or whatever, and they want to sell the car again. So I called the gentleman in Florida that wanted a real General Lee, and I said, Lee 1's for sale. And he said, give me the phone number. And he called me back. He said, I bought it. They'll have it ready for you. I've already wired their money. You just go to Ohio and pick it up. And I go, I don't want this car back. I mean, what? So he flew in from Florida. I went and picked the car up. We met at the Indianapolis International Airport. He came and saw what he purchased, which wasn't the greatest car in the world. It still looked exactly as it did as I found it in Cliff Shaw's yard. And I said, well, what are you going to do with this thing? He said, well, you're going to restore it. And I said, I have no desire to restore this thing. He said, Travis, if someone painted all over the Mona Lisa, someone would have to fix it, and that someone is you. And I'm like, that's pretty heavy. He took off. His plane ticket was for about 3 hours in Indianapolis to talk me into restoring the first General Lee. This car had fallen out of the sky and landed on asphalt 8,310 days before I found it. The transmission tunnel had caved over the top of itself. It was a disaster, but it still had its transmission, still had its motor, still had a lot of stuff in it. So I started writing checks, and we hired a body shop, found a completely junk but good sheet metal 69 Dodge Charger, saved what we could save off the other one. We actually had the original motor rebuilt, and then we restored Lee 1, but we didn't restore it to showroom condition. We restored it to as it appeared Saturday, November 11th, 1978, when it flew. And the decals were crooked because whoever put the decals on the door that day put them on crooked because they followed the wrong line of the car. And so we went ahead and rebuilt the car, and it ran and it drove, and it still had a cracked windshield, and it had a cracked windshield in the show, and the parking sticker was in it. And we had General Lee number 1 again on the road. The most famous car. It's on every Ertl package of it in the air. It's the only one that had chrome rocker panels for the entire show, and it's there. So we had the car, and we had it for a while. He took it back to Florida for a minute and put it in the DuPont Registry Museum down there, and just really kind of fell out of love with it. So it was time to sell it. He asked if we would represent the car again, which, you know, we have no problem with that, and take it to Barrett-Jackson. And for those of you that have had an experience at Barrett-Jackson, oh boy. And it's going to run up on Saturday on the big night and everything else and whatever else. So my friend Jim went out there to represent the car. And he is, if not equally more knowledgeable about the Dukes of Hazzard than I am. And just a walking encyclopedia. I've learned more from him than I learned from most people that appeared on the show. He's out there representing the car, and I had to DJ. So now, when I say I had to DJ, I worked at a club called Boogie Nights for 9 years. I was a disc jockey for 26. So I have a full afro on, glasses, a Harlem Globetrotters uniform, and it's a Saturday night, and I'm looking at about 1,000 people, and I got this little TV in the DJ booth, and this car is about ready to sell. And he had called me, Jim had called me and said, there's this little guy, well-dressed, nice guy, really interested in this car. And I'm like going, I'll sell it to him, you know, I don't care who he is. It's just, all we need is 2 people to get a bidding war on this thing. It rolls up on stage and it starts flying, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70,000. And this is a disc jockey and a luthier that had just restored a car, and we're up over $100,000. We have no business restoring cars. We are just Dukes of Hazzard fans. The minute it hit $110,000, it hit a wall. It was done. And they are begging for bids, like, as you know, anybody, somebody, give me $10. Like, it was ridiculous. But there was a bid from the Skybox, and that Skybox was the eventual winner. And the minute he put his card up, everybody stopped. And they all got out of his way, and it was so weird to watch it happen. But I bought the car for $400, so I'm up to $110,000 on my $400 investment. Come to find out, it was Bubba Watson, and he does live in Scottsdale, and he's local, but a super nice guy, PGA golfer, just a terrific, terrific guy, and it couldn't have gone to a better person. A lot of people are like, Travis, aren't you upset this thing only went for whatever and it was on a rails? I'm a disc jockey, and a luthier restored the first General Lee, and we're fans, and we just made, the car just sold for $110,000 on my $400 investment. I was dancing in the dance club like the Warner Brothers frog, like I was happy as could be. When the car left and went on, Bubba would email me back and forth just occasionally, and I sent him some videos of when we restored it and shirts and whatever else. But then he would appear on a YouTube channel or another program, and he was able to recite the history of the car. So he was a student of the car, so it couldn't have gone to a better person. And he has since restored some things or done some things to make it his car, because it is now his car, and he is allowed to do anything he wants to with it. So some things I didn't expect was the backlash from the Dukes of Hazzard fans that couldn't believe that I would destroy the first General Lee, that I was going to cut this car all up and rebody it, and it's a replica of the first General Lee, and it's no longer the first car. And I was like going, but it's running and driving on the drivetrain it flew on, and all the sheet metal on it's 1969 sheet metal. So I restored the car, but it's a replica. And so I didn't, and there was just threads and just people pissed off. And I'm like going, oh my gosh. So you remember back in the day, the Statue of Liberty had all the scaffolding all over it. They rebodied the whole Statue of Liberty, but they still call it the Statue of Liberty. So even if you restore it, it's still the same thing. We just destroyed Hollywood history, but it was my $400 investment, and they could have bought it for the same amount of money if they would have found it.
Biggest chick magnet I ever had was an ex-cop car. My parents, I don't want to say they're gullible, but they were in Amway, and they did buy colloidal silver and the Dale Alexander's cod liver oil. So, you know, maybe they were a little bit. I played upon that and convinced them they needed to buy a decommissioned Crown Victoria Police Interceptor so that I could practice what I had learned at Skip Barber. So we bought, it was an Irvine Police Department unit number 24, and it still had the 2 spotlights on the front, and of course it was white with a black grille and all that. We proceeded to add a couple antennas, one of them just dummy, the other one for the CB, and I installed a PA in it. You know, perfectly legal. Nothing, no blue lights, no strobes, no sirens. I just happened to have a white Crown Vic that sort of looked like a cop car. The county detective cars up in Maine happened to also be white Crown Vics that basically looked exactly like mine. The advantage was, driving on the highway, I could fly down the left lane with no consequences. Everybody would get out of my way. The disadvantage was, we lived in a small town, 2-lane roads, you get behind people, you went the speed limit everywhere. Girls loved it. You could say almost anything through the PA, and they would think it's hilarious. I drive Ferraris, Porsches, all sorts of stuff like that. People are like, oh man, those must get all the girls. No man, the biggest chick magnet I ever had was an ex-cop car. I had to, of course, buy the Aviators, and I also went on eBay and bought myself one of these. So if you can imagine an 18-year-old kid driving around a white Crown Vic with a couple antennas in this, but we were driving down a 4-lane road and somebody's coming the other way, and as they pass, I just rip the e-brake and just spin it around right behind them, slam on their brakes, move over into the right lane. I follow them for like half a mile and then just drive past them. I mean, we were terrible. It was so much fun. Also, the fun thing to do on the highway, on a 3-lane highway, is what I would do is I just park in the middle lane and I go exactly the speed limit, and I just watch piles of cars, 2-mile-long lines behind me. I was driving through New York one time, and in New York, it's illegal to talk on your cell phone while you're driving. Automatic ticket. It's also technically illegal to have the word police on your car. So the little police interceptor badge on the back is technically illegal in New York. So I got Maine plates on it. I was talking on my cell phone with this hand, or no, I think I had it on my shoulder, and I was eating ice cream with both hands, driving with my knee. A state trooper pulls up beside me, and I look over, I'm like, this isn't good. He looks over and keeps driving. I'm like, man, this is awesome. I can do anything. So the PA was the most fun ever. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? As we drive up and down the street, people just look at us. It's just so confused. I mean, that was really our aim, is just to confuse people. It was a lot of fun. I went to visit my friend, and he goes, hey, and this was in high school. So one of his friends was having a party at his house. His parents were away, so I mean, all minors, tons of booze, all that. He's like, let's go bust the party. So I get on my trusty hat and aviators. We all pile into the Crown Vic. And the best part was, as we're turning down the street, somebody behind us was going to the party. So they called people at the party. They go, guys, cops are on their way. Took the spotlights and we're, doing this. And I get on the PA, 100% volume. Kip Farron, come out of the house. Kip Farron, come out of the house now with your hands in the air. So we're waiting and waiting. And a couple minutes later, he walks out of the house, like this. He's coming out of the front lawn. And I couldn't contain myself any longer. I just start laughing into the PA, And so he sees it's us. And he comes over the driver's side and just drags me out of the car and starts hugging me because he's so relieved that he wasn't actually getting busted. And he's like, oh my gosh, dude, we were chucking beer in the woods and like flushing stuff down the toilet and this and that. He's like, holy crap, that was so awesome. We could see this pickup truck parked face out to the entrance of this gravel pit. So my buddy goes, hey, that's my cousin. He just got out of jail. He's on probation. I bet you any amount of money that he's back there smoking weed with an underage girl. So we, e-brake, come to a sliding stop facing him, and you just see him just get wide-eyed. So I, get on the PA, same thing, tell him to get out of the truck, put his hands on the truck and all that. And of course, sure enough, in the passenger seat was this like about 14-year-old girl. And so he's sitting there with his hands on the truck, just freaking out. And of course, after messing with him for a couple minutes, we told him, we're like, dude, we're just messing with you and all that. It was just great fun. For being an 18-year-old with a Crown Vic that looked like a cop car, I'd like to say I had a lot of self-control. They decided to donate it to some local missionaries after I moved to college. So now it's on a mission from God.
He could have told me there's a dead body in the back. As long as I got to take that engine home with me, it was great. So I've been a gearhead, a car guy, a motorcycle guy my entire life, but I really love trucks. And my absolute favorite truck in the entire world is the one that I currently drive, the one I plan to keep forever, and that is my 2006 Dodge Ram Overlander. Now, my love for this particular truck started in 1999 when Dodge at the Detroit International Motor Show unveiled the Dodge Power Wagon concept truck. And this truck was just the coolest thing I had ever seen. It was this modern stylistic interpretation of the old 1930s and 40s power wagons that you'd seen as like command cars in World War II, with the big narrow grille and the big fenders with the headlights out on the fenders. And this was like a modern version of that, but it had this sleek windshield and a big diesel in it, big tires, and I just thought it was the coolest looking thing ever. And And during that time, Dodge was known, they'd taken the Prowler from a concept deal, they made that. They'd come out with the Viper, they made that. So I was like, when can I get my hands on this truck? Well, they were never going to make it. Closest I ever got was this little Hot Wheels I set on my desk. It was the same truck, but it was actually black. But then in 2006, when the third generation Ram facelift came out, suddenly this was the truck I'd been waiting on. It was close. It had the narrow grille, had these big fenders with the headlights kind of wrapping up onto the fenders. And I looked at it and I thought, man, if I could just get like some big fender flares and that big bumper and the winch, like that truck, some lift, some big tires, that truck is going to be as close as I'm ever to get to this concept truck. At that time too, I was shutting down my overlanding company. I was rock crawling the diesel Scout I have. I was road racing sport bikes. I was drag racing a hot rod Hemi Dodge Magnum. I was doing track days with a buddy of mine in a BMW. I was racing dirt bike. I was just had too many irons in the fire. So I started looking, and again, it took me a couple of years to kind of put some of my projects aside, and I really started looking in earnest. And the 2006 through 2008 had this body style, but the 06 was really the holy grail. It was the first year of the big limo-like mega cab, but it was the last year of the old school 5.9 Cummins diesel, which is just a fantastic motor. So I started looking for these trucks, and I'm very rapidly finding two ends of the spectrum. Either it is some work truck that looks like a building has collapsed on it. On the high end of the price range, I was finding these, every optioned out, showroom perfect, clean version that some urban cowboy wanted way too much money for. So in a page that Ed would write later, I started looking for things like damage or salvage or repair. And, I'm a pretty good mechanic, and I figure I can fix pretty much anything that might be wrong with it. So that rabbit hole started leading me finding all sorts of other trucks. It would either be a truck that said slight frame damage that looked like it had been dropped out of an airplane, or it would say, needs interior, but it had been completely torched. There were a couple of good solid diesel four-wheel drives went through, but I either got outbid or just missed them. But my search through the dark side of used vehicles led me to some of the DEA, like federal law enforcement auctions, like where they would bust a drug dealer or some guy with a bunch of taxes or something. So I started looking through these sites, and I found one, and there it was. It was 2006 3500 four-wheel drive mega cab. It was the single tracks, even though it would normally have been a dually. It just had one set of wheels in the back. The big diesel. It already had the bumpers on it. It had the fender flares. It had like everything I wanted, and it was black. It was like the closest thing to that little Hot Wheel car, and I had to have it. Called the guys immediately, and they were pretty cool. They just said, yeah, we get these things from DEA auctions, ATF, any kind of a seizure, and if there's a truck you want, send a $500 deposit. We'll secure the truck. You can come down and look at it. If there's anything wrong with it, you can keep half your deposit. Like, okay, well, I'm looking at the price, and this price was pretty low for a truck of this time. It was about half of what the market was going for, and it looked okay in the pictures. So I asked the guy, I said, well, why is the price as it is? Is it damaged? Is there some sort of mechanical issue? And he said, well, they're hard trucks to move because a lot of people are a little weary of their possibly criminal past. He said a lot of times they've been sitting in an impound lot for a long time. The radios are missing. There's some kind of weird damage to them sometimes. But, this truck's solid. It's in good shape. And again, if you don't like it, you can get half your deposit back. And I immediately knew that if I let this one go, I was going to regret it. So I wired him the money. I rented a car, and I drove to Houston. And the address they gave me was this warehouse, just this sort of unmarked warehouse. And everything is just this washed out, overexposed 70s, just kind of hazy, light, bleached out white, except that truck. It was next to the building behind like a 12-foot chain link fence, like some sort of caged animal. And this truck was just sitting there, and the truck was black. It had limo tinted windows. They were black. The emblems were black. It had black projector lights on it. It had big black bumpers. It had black aftermarket wheels. And it wasn't like that chalky flat black. It was this inky, like light just disappeared into it. This truck looked menacing in the daylight. And I saw it, and I knew that even this may have been murdered in his truck, like I was going home in his truck. So I knock on the door, but a very bouncy, very exuberant guy pops up, named Skip or something, pops up. Hey, you're here for the truck? Great, well, here it is. So, you know, he takes me out back, and like stepping into this little fenced in area with this truck, it was like, I was excited even then. It was like getting into a cage with this thing. It was just sitting there, and it was just the most sinister looking truck, and I was just so excited. And you know, and I walk over to it, and I look inside, and you know, from the outside it looked okay. The inside looked all right, except there was a little bit of damage to the inside. The seat bolster on the driver's seat was like broken, and the visor was torn down, and there was like the radio had been kicked in, and it looked like there'd been some sort of wrestling match that happened inside the truck, and it was otherwise clean, though. They'd wiped it out pretty well. It looks like somebody had sat in the passenger seat, maybe shaken up a Dr. Pepper. There was like water stains all over the headliner, and the carpet was all stained, and there was some kind of they'd wiped the door panel and the dash down, but there's some little cracks that just had some stain and stuff in it. And I'm thinking, okay, just somebody spilled a drink or something. So I'm about to get out and look under the hood, and the guy produces a key, and you know, it was the typical Dodge key fob, but it had this motel key hanging on it. It was a motel that had the address scratched out, and it was just on the keychain. Okay, that's a little weird, but nonetheless, the salesman actually didn't even want to go on the test drive with me. He just said, hey, look, I'm going to get the paperwork together. You go take it for a spin. Drove it out to the road, and this is one of those big Texas highways with the turn lane in the middle and 2 lanes on either side, big wide group. And so I saw my gap, and I put my foot in it, and immediately this truck just took off. Like, as soon as I started turning out across the road, I'm making a left turn, I could feel the rear end stepping out. I just kind of turned into it, and it just made the most gorgeous just power slide across all 5 lanes, just sort of held the drift for a second, and as I leaned off the gas, it just straightened up beautifully. So I'm just sailing on the highway and just loving every second of it. I see an exit coming up, so I get off, and I kind of get off the exit and turn. I go under the overpass, and I'm sitting there for a second and, just kind of listen to it. There's nothing in the road in front of me. It's just a big, long, straight Texas road. And, I put it in 4-wheel drive and, put my left foot on the brake and kind of do the, country boy launch control. Just kind of build the boost up a little bit. And, it's in 4-wheel drive. And the second I let off the brake and gave it the gas, it just snapped my head back. That truck took off with just this amazing roar and rumble. Just, oh my God, this acceleration, holy butt. I mean, I've drag raced a lot of cars. This thing was fast. I switch it out of 4-wheel drive at about 65 miles an hour. It's going. I bury the speedometer at 120. I look at my GPS, it says 138. The truck is starting to rise up. I had these big, like 14-inch wide tires, which that kind of centrifugal force, they become cones. And I could feel the truck actually like gaining height. It was right up on the tires. Oh my God. So I slow it down, and it wiggles a little bit. And I'm just like, oh my God, what do I have here? And I turn it around and get back to the same underpass, and I stop the truck, and I get out before I get back to this office, and I open the hood, and it was like in Pulp Fiction when they open the briefcase, there's that glow. I mean, it was just this giant air cleaner the size of a desk trash can, and this big shiny crossover pipe, and wrapped fuel lines, and like 2 fuel lines feeding it. And I could see the head, and like there's gasket material on it. The head's been off. Presumably it's got pistons, valve springs, who knows what else in it. Like all the way back, I'm just thinking like, oh my God, like they're going to find out like what's under the hood of this thing. They're going to back out of this deal. I'm already thinking like I'm driving really safely. I don't want somebody to like wreck it before I can sign the title. Like I almost got this like I'm a shoplifter. Like I just got to get out somehow with this truck. I get back, and then the guy was just very nonchalant, hey, how'd it drive? And I'm trying to be all cool. I'm like, it drives okay. It sounds good. He's like, yeah, I think it's got a chip in it for fuel mileage or something. I think it needs a new muffler though. And I look up underneath it. It looked like 3 big mufflers welded end to end that were all wrapped in some kind of crazy insulation or something. I'm like, that's weird, but okay, heat exchange or something. There were some weird little lights on the front bumper I couldn't find a switch for. I follow the wire back, and it goes to wherever the component that had been screwed to the console was. And I started looking at them, and they were like the 24-volt infrared lights that would normally be on like a Striker or a Hummer or something. And I was like, man, this is cool. The drug smugglers must have like been using like night vision goggles or something. And there was a little like a spring-loaded interrupt switch. And what I pretty much discovered was that all the interior lights had been pried out of the truck. The fuses for every one of the lights, for the dash, for every light on the truck, the horn had been cut. Everything on this truck that could possibly make a sound or any light had been cut. And they were pretty much just using this little infrared lights. And, you know, with the truck being all blacked out and this big long muffler thing on the back, I'm thinking this wasn't like the smuggler where you got the hidden compartment in the trunk. This was like they were just straight up driving over the border in the dark, getting whatever they were doing, coming back and just running full stealth mode. And I guess with this hot rod motor and the bumpers, they were just going to run it or ram it. So we're doing the paperwork, and I asked the guy, you know, about the history of the truck. And, you know, of course, he's like, well, you know, I don't really have any actual information. He said, but I do know it has not been registered in almost 3 years. There's no insurance claims or anything. I'd run the VIN number on it already. There were no, it hadn't been totaled or wrecked or anything. It had just been not registered. I'm like, okay, that's kind of weird. And he did tell me it had been seized in Laredo, Texas, which is right on the Mexican border. And DEA had had it for about a year. And then they had flipped it to the auction where they had obtained it. So I'm like, okay. I said, was it like some kind of undercover thing or something? He said, well, it's hard to tell, but you know, with the title, usually, yes, they may do that if they seize a truck, but then decide to use it like for their own undercover stuff. When they're done with it, they just wash the title. That way the next owner isn't in any way associated with whatever badness might have gone on. I'm like, okay, whatever. At this point, he could have told me there's a dead body in the back. As long as I got to take that engine home with me, it was great. So I get the truck, you know, it was a good time of my life. I was able to pay cash for it, just paid him cash, hit the road with the truck. So I proceed to get the truck fixed. I pull the crazy exhaust pipe off, put a 5-inch exhaust all the way out of the back. That truck dynoed at 698 horsepower and 1,158 foot-pounds of torque. It was just a riot to drive. It was, as I said before, you know, a big vehicle like that, when you go sliding it around a clover leaf or power sliding it onto some street, you know, the weight of the truck just pulls the tires along. So it was the easiest thing to control. I'd get off on an exit ramp and just tap the gas and sling the rear end out and just, you know, one hand on the wheel. I drove that truck through the side windows as much as I did the front. I just treated it like I was in some Gymkhana video for like 2 years. Just had such a great time with it. I raced it. It turned 12s at the quarter mile in Commerce. I spun the tires every chance I get. Of course, I was going through a $2,000 set of tires about every 10 months, but I did not care because it was so much fun. But, you know, as they say, the candle that burns twice as bright burns half as long, and all good things come to an end. The engine started making some bad noises. The transmission started shifting kind of funny, and you know, I looked around to some people who could do performance diesel, and I found a really, really great shop, Garmin's Diesel Performance down in Griffin, Georgia. And they just knew that engine backwards and forwards, and they were really talented guys. And they went through it, and they said, well, we're going to need an entire new drivetrain. That was just way out of my budget. But, again, with a fantastic stroke of luck, the guys there had seen some of my sculptures out of car parts. And the shop guys there said, hey, we want to give Jeff a really great Christmas present from the shop. And he's a guitar player. Do you think you could make a guitar out of some of these parts from your engine and some of these other trucks and transmissions? And I was like, yeah. Never built a guitar before. I don't play guitar, but I'm not going to pass up a chance like this. So I said yes. So I left the truck with them, scooped up as many parts I could fit in the car, and took them back and started cobbling together this guitar. And I went to a pawn shop, bought a playable, you know, bought a 6-string electric, just kind of cut out the playable bit and started building this elaborate, you know, body around it. And I used lots of gears. I wanted to capture the mechanical nature of their engine shop and their transmission shop. And it came together really well. And I went away with the most fantastic hand-built Cummins diesel engine by these guys. So even though the engine is all sorted out in this truck now, the electrical sorted out, everything works, everything is new. We've done axles, we've done transmission, we've done the engine, everything is great. But the sort of nefarious history of this truck still kind of intrigued me. Now, I'd fixed all the wiring, I had rewired it all, got rid of the infrared lights, but, you know, I was just trying to figure out, like, what happened inside this truck. And I had since replaced the radio where it gotten kicked, but the seat is still, to this day, the seat is still bent back, you know, the visor, like, what happened in this truck? And so I was over there cleaning it one day, and I was just still kind of getting into nooks and crannies. I was over in that side with the carpets all stained and the stains in the door panel, and I'm cleaning them. I've got just some alcohol with a Q-tip, and I'm kind of cleaning them out. And a buddy of mine's over there, and he's looking at it, and he was like, hold on a second. He's a hunter, and he goes out to his truck, and he comes back with one of those like blue, like the blood tracker lights, which really only work with like fresh blood, but he shines it in the just kind of Dr. Pepper looking stuff. was just jet black under the light. And he said, dude, that's blood. I got it all cleaned up, but I started thinking like, my God, did somebody get killed in this truck? From 2011 to 2006, that truck is just a ghost. It wasn't registered anywhere. I can't find a title on it. So whatever happened with the DEA with this truck, I don't know if they seized it from somebody and then they used it. Did something go bad when it was the good guy's truck? Did it just go bad when it was the bad guy's truck and they kept it? I don't know. So fast forward another couple of months, and I'm helping a buddy of mine. He was moving. He had a bunch of old Range Rovers and Land Rovers that he was restoring and working on. And I was already there, and a guy kind of showed up late. And as he walks up, he said, man, whose black truck is that? And I said, oh, it's mine. He said, man, if we were back in Texas, I would swear you were the drug smuggler my sister used to date. And I was like, wow, yeah, that's pretty crazy. And I kept my mouth shut just in case he still knew this drug smuggler. So again, I don't know what the history of this truck was, but it's definitely had a very dark past. However, I have tried to give it a brighter future. I've been building this truck into the ultimate overlanding truck since. I have built a custom roof rack for it. I've put my roof tent up top. I've got all my camping gear. I built a red bed in the back for dual spares, all my tools. I put a lift kit on it, bigger tires, added the winch. I've put 360-degree lights around it, an awning, a snorkel, limb risers, all the great stuff. I take it to Caffeine and Octane here in Atlanta. I want to take this truck eventually and drive it from Tierra del Fuego to Prudhoe Bay. I want to do some big Alaska trips with it. I've done some great road trips, and I've been building this truck for that. It is the ultimate overland truck to me that I can build. It's been a great truck. I've met so many people at gas stations and just random people who want to come look at it that have now become great friends of mine. And I plan on keeping this truck forever, despite its nefarious drug smuggling past.
So there you go, those are our top 10 American car stories. Again, happy 4th of July. I hope that you have a wonderful day. And again, please check out the Ticket Clinic to help you fight all of your ticket needs.